Hello everyone, I am MANO Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. My name is Emily Hall, and I am 32 years old. This happened in the Monongahela National Forest in West Virginia, just 3 months ago. I still wake up screaming most nights. The hiking trip was my idea. A way to reconnect with my childhood friend, Olivia Bailey, after she'd gone through a brutal divorce. Just us girls in the wilderness, I'd said cheerfully over the phone. No cell reception, no problems, just like when we were kids. I'd been so naive. Olivia had agreed reluctantly. She wasn't the outdoorsy type anymore, hadn't been since high school. But I insisted it would be therapeutic. Fresh air, exercise, distance from her ex-husband Derek, who'd been harassing her with texts and calls. I promised her the Seneca Creek backcountry would heal her spirit. Instead, I led her straight into a nightmare. We arrived at the trailhead on a crisp October morning. The parking lot was empty except for a single pickup truck with West Virginia plates and a bumper sticker that read, "These woods bite back." I remember joking about it as we shouldered our packs. The forest spread before us in a riot of autumn colors, crimson, amber, and gold, breathtaking. But there was something off about the silence. No birdsong, no rustling in the underbrush, just the whisper of wind through dying leaves. "It's beautiful," Olivia said, her breath pluming in the cool air. She looked better already, some color returning to her pale cheeks. "Maybe you were right about this trip." I smiled, relieved. "Trust me, by the time we reach Seneca Falls, you'll be a new woman." Looking back, I can't believe how prophetic those words would prove to be. The first day's hike was perfect. 6 miles along Seneca Creek, crossing the water at various points as the trail demanded. We set up camp in a clearing near the creek, our tent nestled between 2 ancient sycamores. I built a fire while Olivia prepared dinner, freeze-dried stroganoff that tasted like heaven after our long trek. We shared a bottle of Cabernet I'd packed as a surprise, sipping from collapsible silicone cups as darkness fell. "To new beginnings," I toasted. Olivia clinked her cup against mine. "To leaving the past behind." That was when we heard it, a distant, mournful sound that wasn't quite human and wasn't quite animal. "What was that?" Olivia whispered, her body suddenly tense. "Probably just a fox," I said with more confidence than I felt. "They can sound really human sometimes." The sound came again, closer this time, a keening wail that raised the hair on my arms. "That's not a fox, Emily. Coyote then, or maybe someone's dog from another campsite." But I knew there were no other campsites nearby. We'd chosen this route specifically for its isolation. The fire flickered, casting strange shadows across Olivia's face. She looked younger suddenly, vulnerable. "I don't like this." "It's nothing," I insisted, pouring more wine into her cup. "First night jitters. Remember when we went camping with Girl Scouts and you were convinced there was a bear outside the tent?" "And there was," she retorted. "The scoutmaster chased it off with an air horn." I laughed, trying to dispel the tension. "Well, I don't have an air horn, but I've got bear spray and a very intimidating pocket knife." That got a smile from her, however tentative. We talked for another hour, catching up on the years between us. Olivia told me more about her marriage, how Derek had slowly isolated her from friends and family, how he'd begun tracking her movements, checking her phone. The more she spoke, the angrier I became. I'd known things were bad, but not this bad. "He told me once that if I ever left him, he'd find me," she said, staring into the dying embers of our fire. "That no matter where I went, he'd hunt me down." "He won't find you here," I assured her, reaching across to squeeze her hand. "And when we get back, we'll get a restraining order. I promise." We went to bed not long after, exhausted from the day's hike. I fell asleep almost immediately, lulled by the gentle sound of the creek. I woke to Olivia shaking me. "Emily!" she hissed. "Someone's outside the tent." I sat up groggily, fumbling for my headlamp. "What?" "Listen." I held my breath. At first I heard nothing but the creak and the rustle of leaves. Then, footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps circling our tent. "Hello?" I called out, my voice embarrassingly shaky. "Is someone there?" The footsteps stopped. Olivia's fingers dug into my arm, her nails leaving half-moon imprints in my skin. "Maybe it's a ranger," she whispered. I shook my head. "At 3 a.m.? The silence stretched, unbearable. Then something brushed against the side of the tent, a light touch that traveled from one end to the other, like someone dragging their fingers across the fabric. "Go away!" Olivia suddenly shouted, her voice cracking with fear. The touching stopped. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a voice, low and distorted, as if coming from a damaged vocal cord, whispered just outside the thin nylon wall separating us from whatever was out there. "Olivia!" it rasped. "I found you!" Olivia's face drained of color. "Derek," she breathed. "Oh God, it's Derek!" I unzipped the tent with trembling hands, adrenaline surging through my veins. I wasn't going to cower while some abusive ex terrorized my friend. The bear spray was in the vestibule. I grabbed it, along with my flashlight. "Stay here," I told Olivia, who nodded mutely, eyes wide with terror. I stepped out into the moonlit clearing, heart pounding in my chest. The beam of my flashlight swept across our campsite. Empty. I made a complete circle scanning the trees at the perimeter. "Derek?" I called out. "I know you're there. You need to leave now, or I'm calling the Rangers." A bluff. We both knew there was no cell service here. No response. The forest was deathly quiet. I was about to return to the tent when my flashlight caught something on one of the sycamore trees. I moved closer, the beam illuminating a crude carving in the bark. "Welcome home, Olivia." The letters were fresh, the exposed wood pale and oozing sap. I touched the carving with my fingertips, heart racing. It hadn't been there when we'd set up camp. "Did you find him?" Olivia called from the tent. I hesitated. "No," I said finally. "Must have been an animal." I couldn't bring myself to tell her about the carving. Not yet. Not while we were miles from anywhere, in the middle of the night. Instead, I returned to the tent, zipped it securely, and lay down beside her, the bear spray clutched to my chest. "Try to sleep," I whispered. "I'll keep watch." But neither of us slept. We lay side by side, tense and silent, listening to the forest around us until dawn finally broke. In the pale morning light, the events of the night seemed almost dreamlike. The carving was still there, of course, proof that I hadn't imagined it, but Olivia didn't notice it as we prepared breakfast. I purposely positioned myself between her and the tree, debating whether to tell her what I'd found. "Maybe we should head back," I suggested as we ate our instant oatmeal. "If Derek somehow followed us—" "No," Olivia interrupted, setting down her spoon. "I'm not letting him win, Emily. That's what he wants, to control me, to make me afraid. I won't give him that power." I studied her face. There was determination there, but also fear. "Are you sure? We can try this another time when—" "I'm sure," she said firmly. "Besides, it probably wasn't him. You said yourself you didn't see anyone." I nodded reluctantly. "All right, but we stick together, okay? No wandering off alone." We packed up camp and continued our journey deeper into the Monongahela. According to my map, we were heading toward a landmark called Spruce Knob Lake, the highest lake in the state. The trail grew steeper as the morning progressed, winding through dense stands of red spruce and mountain laurel. Around noon, we reached a rocky outcropping that offered a spectacular view of the valley below. Vibrant autumn foliage stretched as far as the eye could see, broken only by the silver ribbon of Seneca Creek. We paused to catch our breath and take photos. "It's like we're the only people in the world," Olivia murmured, gazing out over the wilderness. That was when I noticed the smoke. a thin gray column rising from the trees about a half-mile ahead, near where we planned to camp that night. "Looks like we're not completely alone," I said, pointing. "Another campsite." Olivia squinted. "Should we find somewhere else to stop?" I considered it. On one hand, company might be safer if Derek really had followed us. On the other, I'd promised Olivia solitude. "Let's continue as planned," I decided. "We can check out who's there when we get closer. If they seem sketchy, we'll move on." We descended from the outcropping, the trail leading us into a dense section of forest where sunlight barely penetrated the canopy. The temperature dropped noticeably, and the silence grew deeper. No wind, no birds, just the muffled sound of our boots on the pine-needled path. "Emily," Olivia said suddenly, stopping in her tracks. "Look." She was pointing at a tree beside the trail. A familiar pattern had been carved into the bark. "Welcome home, Olivia." My stomach lurched. It's probably just a coincidence," I stammered. "Someone with the same name. In the middle of nowhere? Twice?" Olivia's voice rose with panic. "He's following us, Emily. Derek is following us." I put an arm around her shoulders, feeling her trembling beneath my touch. "Let's keep moving," I said quietly. "The campsite with the fire isn't far ahead. We'll find other hikers there. Safety in numbers." We quickened our pace, constantly looking over our shoulders. Every snapping twig made us flinch. The forest, which had seemed so beautiful that morning, now felt malevolent, hiding secrets in its shadows. An hour later, we reached the area where I'd seen the smoke. A small clearing opened up beside a bend in the creek, perfect for camping, but it was deserted. No tent, no fire, no people. Just a crude fire ring containing the cold ashes of a recent blaze. "I don't understand," I muttered, looking around in confusion. "The smoke was coming from right here." Olivia hugged herself, eyes darting nervously. Someone was here. They must have packed up and left. I knelt beside the fire ring, touching the ashes. They were stone cold, as if the fire had been out for days, not hours. Impossible. I'd seen the smoke with my own eyes. "We should keep going," Olivia urged. "I don't like this place." I was about to agree when I noticed something half buried in the ashes, a scrap of fabric. Using a stick, I carefully pulled it out. It was a piece of charred cloth, recognizable despite the damage. "Isn't this—" My voice trailed off as recognition dawned. Olivia leaned closer, then recoiled. "That's from my nightshirt, the one I packed for this trip." My blood ran cold. The shirt was in Olivia's pack. I'd watched her stuff it in that morning. I stood up slowly, scanning the clearing with new eyes. That was when I noticed the arrangement of stones near the fire ring. Not random, but deliberately placed to form letters. "Found you." "We're leaving," I said, grabbing Olivia's arm. "Now, back to the car." We didn't even discuss it. Abandoning our plans, we turned around and started back the way we'd come, moving as fast as the terrain would allow. The sun was already beginning its descent behind the mountains. We had maybe 4 hours of daylight left. "How is this happening?" Olivia gasped as we hurried along the trail. "How did he get my shirt? How is he always ahead of us?" I had no answers. None of this made sense. Derek was manipulative and controlling, but this level of psychological torment seemed beyond him. And how could he have known where exactly we were going? I hadn't told anyone our specific route, not even when I'd filed our backcountry permit. We reached the rocky outcropping again just as the light began to fade. Making a split-second decision, I led us off the main trail onto a smaller, less obvious path that branched to the east. "Where are we going?" Olivia panted. "This isn't the way back." "I know," I said grimly, "but if he's watching the main trail, this might throw him off. It connects back to the parking area eventually, just takes a different route." It was a gamble, but it seemed like our best option. The new path was overgrown in places, clearly less traveled. Thorny bushes clawed at our clothes as we pushed through, and the fading light made it increasingly difficult to follow the trail. "We need to find somewhere to stop for the night," Olivia said after we'd been walking for almost an hour. I can barely see the path anymore." She was right. Continuing in darkness would be dangerous. We could easily get lost or injured. I consulted my map by flashlight, trying to get our bearings. "There's an old fire lookout tower marked here," I said, pointing to a symbol on the map. "It should be about a half-mile ahead. We can shelter there for the night." We pressed on, guided now by our flashlights. The forest seemed to close in around us, branches reaching out like grasping hands. Every shadow concealed potential threats. The distant hoot of an owl made us both jump. Finally, the trail opened into a small clearing dominated by a weathered wooden structure. The fire tower. It rose about 40 feet into the air, a square platform at its top. The stairs looked ancient but intact. "We climb up," I decided. "If he's following us, he'll have to use the stairs. We'll hear him coming." The tower creaked ominously as we ascended, the weathered steps groaning under our weight. At the top was a small enclosed cabin, once used by forest rangers to spot wildfires. The glass windows were intact on 3 sides, the 4th was boarded over. The door hung slightly ajar, swinging gently in the breeze. I pushed it open cautiously, sweeping my flashlight across the interior. A simple wooden table stood in the center, accompanied by a single chair. Dust covered every surface, undisturbed for what looked like years. "It's safe," I said, gesturing for Olivia to enter. "We can barricade the door and take turns keeping watch." She stepped inside, dropping her pack with a sigh of relief. "This was smart, Emily. He'll never find us here." I hoped she was right. We used the chair to brace the door shut, then spread our sleeping bags on the wooden floor. Outside, the wind had picked up, whistling through the trees and making the tower sway slightly. I tried not to think about how old the structure was, or how long since it had been inspected. "You should try to sleep," I told Olivia, settling down with my back against the wall. "I'll take first watch." She nodded gratefully, crawling into her sleeping bag. Despite her exhaustion, it took her nearly an hour to fall asleep. I watched her breathing finally steady, her face relaxing for the first time since we'd found that carving. The hours crawled by. I stared out at the moonlit forest, straining to detect any movement below. Nothing stirred except the wind-tossed branches. Occasionally, I'd shine my flashlight down at the base of the tower, confirming we were still alone. It must have been around 2 a.m. when I noticed the smell. Faint at first, then increasingly acrid. Smoke. I sat up straight, suddenly alert. Was something burning? I scanned the forest again, this time looking for the telltale glow of flames. Nothing. Yet the smell grew stronger. I moved to one of the windows, peering out. That's when I saw it. Thin wisps of smoke rising through the floorboards. Not from the forest. From inside the tower itself. "Olivia!" I shook her awake. "We have to go, now." She blinked at me, confused. "What's happening?" "Fire," I said, already gathering our things. "Underneath us." We moved quickly, shoving essentials into our packs. I pulled the chair away from the door, only to find it wouldn't open. The knob turned, but the door remained firmly shut, as if sealed or barricaded from the outside. "It's stuck," I grunted, throwing my shoulder against it. Not even a budge. Smoke was now visibly seeping through the cracks in the floor. The acrid smell filled the small cabin, making us cough. "The windows," Olivia suggested, moving toward one. I followed her lead, both of us working to force open a window that had clearly been painted shut decades ago. It finally gave way with a screech of protesting wood. Cold night air rushed in, temporarily clearing some of the smoke. "We'll have to climb down the outside," I said, peering down at the dizzying drop. There was no fire escape, no ladder, just the sheer side of the tower with occasional crossbeams. A sudden roar from below confirmed our worst fears. Orange light flickered up through the floorboards. The entire base of the tower was engulfed in flames. "Go," I urged, helping Olivia out onto the narrow ledge outside the window. "Try to climb down to the next crossbeam, then work your way around to the stairs." She nodded. face pale in the moonlight. With trembling hands, she began her descent, feeling blindly for footholds on the weathered wood. I was about to follow when something caught my eye, a flash of movement in the trees below. A figure stood at the edge of the clearing, watching. Even from this distance, I could make out a familiar silhouette. "Derek?" I whispered. But as the figure stepped into the moonlight, I realized it wasn't Derek at all. It was a woman, tall and gaunt with long gray hair that hung in wild tangles around her face. She wore what looked like an old-fashioned dress, tattered and stained, and she was staring directly up at me with eyes that seemed to glow in the darkness. I froze, unable to process what I was seeing. This made no sense. Who was she? What was she doing in the middle of nowhere at 2 a.m.? A shout from Olivia broke my trance. "Emily, hurry!" The smoke was getting thicker, the heat more intense. I had no choice. I climbed out onto the ledge, trying to follow Olivia's path. The wood was rough against my palms, offering some grip as I lowered myself inch by terrifying inch. Below, the mysterious woman hadn't moved. She continued to watch our desperate escape attempt with an unsettling stillness. I had just reached the first crossbeam when I heard the crack. The ancient wood, weakened by fire, was giving way. Olivia screamed as the section she clung to splintered. I watched in horror as she fell, tumbling through the darkness to land with a sickening thud on the ground below. "Olivia!" I screamed. But there was no response, no movement from her crumpled form. The tower groaned ominously, swaying as the fire consumed its base. I had seconds, not minutes. Abandoning caution, I half climbed, half fell the rest of the way down, using the crossbeams where I could, sliding painfully down rough wooden surfaces where I couldn't. When I finally reached the ground, my hands were bloody and splintered, my clothes torn. I scrambled to Olivia's side, praying she was alive. She was breathing, thank God, but unconscious. A gash on her forehead leaked blood, and her right leg lay at an unnatural angle. Broken, definitely broken. I looked up, remembering the woman, but the clearing was empty. She had vanished as inexplicably as she had appeared. The tower above us was now fully engulfed, a pillar of fire against the night sky. We needed to move, to get away before it collapsed. With strength born of desperation, I managed to lift Olivia. She was lighter than I expected, or perhaps adrenaline made her weight manageable. I started toward the trail, my friend's limp body in my arms, her blood soaking into my shirt. The path seemed different in the darkness, unfamiliar. After what felt like hours of stumbling through the forest, I realized with growing horror that I was lost. The trail had disappeared, replaced by dense undergrowth and fallen logs that made progress almost impossible. Olivia stirred in my arms, moaning softly. Emily? "I'm here," I whispered. "You're going to be okay." Her eyes fluttered open, glazed with pain. "What happened?" "The tower collapsed. You fell, but we're safe now." The last part was a lie, but she didn't need to know that. "It hurts," she whimpered. "My leg." "I know. I'm going to find help." Another lie. In the middle of the wilderness, miles from anywhere, what help could there be? I needed to find shelter, somewhere I could tend to Olivia's injuries. The night was getting colder, and shock was a real danger for both of us. Through the trees ahead, I spotted what looked like a structure, a cabin perhaps, or a shed, too regular to be natural. I moved toward it, hope flaring in my chest. It was indeed a cabin, small and weathered, its windows dark, an old hunting lodge possibly, or a ranger outpost. I tried the door, expecting it to be locked. To my surprise, it swung open at my touch. The interior was Spartan but clean. A wooden table with 2 chairs, a small wood stove in the corner, a narrow cot against one wall. No electricity, no running water, but it was shelter. I laid Olivia gently on the cot, then used my flashlight to explore the cabin more thoroughly. A shelf held a few dusty cans of food, a manual can opener, and, miracle of miracles, A first aid kit. We got lucky, I told Olivia as I returned to her side. Really lucky. But had we? But the convenience seemed suspicious. A fully stocked cabin, unlocked, exactly when we needed it most. After everything else that had happened, it felt like another piece of an elaborate trap. I pushed the thought aside. Trap or not, it was our only option. I opened the first aid kit and got to work cleaning Olivia's head wound. The gash wasn't as bad as I'd feared. Scalp wounds always bleed dramatically. Her leg was the bigger concern. I didn't dare try to set the break, but I used 2 pieces of firewood and strips torn from a blanket to create a crude splint. "Who was she?" Olivia murmured as I worked. "That woman." I paused, surprised. "You saw her too?" Olivia nodded weakly. Standing in the trees, watching us, she looked wrong. Wrong how? Like she wasn't really there, like a photograph that's been damaged. Olivia's eyes drifted closed. "I think I know her, Emily. I think I've seen her before." A chill ran through me. "Where?" But Olivia had slipped back into unconsciousness, her face pale in the beam of my flashlight. I finished tending to her injuries as best I could, then checked the wood stove. It was clean and functional, with a small stack of split logs beside it. I got a fire going, grateful for the warmth it provided. As the cabin heated up, I explored a bit more. A trap door in the floor revealed a small root cellar containing preserved foods and jugs of water. Whoever owned this place kept it well stocked. On one wall hung several black and white photographs in simple frames. I shined my light on them, curious. They showed the same location at different times. This very cabin, it seemed. One photo from the 1930s showed a solemn family posed in front. A grim-faced man with a shotgun, a thin woman in a long dress, and 3 children with vacant expressions. Another, from what looked like the 1950s, showed just the woman, now gray-haired and gaunt, standing alone on the porch. The final photo, more recent, showed the cabin abandoned and overgrown. I stepped closer to the middle photo, my heart suddenly racing. The woman in the picture, older, alone, looked exactly like the figure I'd seen watching us from the trees. "What is this place?" I whispered to myself. As if in answer, a sound came from outside, a slow, deliberate knocking on the cabin door. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 more knocks. I stood frozen, the flashlight trembling in my hand. My eyes darted to Olivia, still unconscious on the cot, then to the door. The knocking came again, more insistent this time. "Who's there?" I called, trying to keep my voice steady. No answer, just another series of knocks. I moved to the window, trying to see who stood outside. The glass was grimy, offering only a distorted view of the clearing. A figure stood on the porch, tall and thin, a woman in what appeared to be a long dress. The same woman from the photo. The same woman from the forest. "What do you want?" I demanded, louder this time. Still no response. The knocking continued, steady and rhythmic. I considered my options. Stay inside and hope she went away? Try to communicate? If she knew these woods, maybe she could help us get back to civilization. I took a deep breath and approached the door, one hand on the knife in my pocket. "I'm opening the door," I announced. "Please, we need help. My friend is injured." I turned the handle slowly, pulling the door open just enough to see through the crack. The porch was empty. I blinked in confusion, then opened the door wider, stepping out into the cold night air. There was no one there, no sign anyone had been. "Hello," I called into the darkness. The forest remained silent, the only sound the creaking of trees in the wind. I was about to go back inside when something caught my eye. A piece of paper nailed to one of the porch posts. It hadn't been there when we arrived. I was certain of it. I approached cautiously, using my flashlight to illuminate the yellowed paper. Written on it in a spidery, ancient-looking hand were 5 words: "She belongs to the Hollow." My hands trembled as I tore the paper down. What did it mean? Who belonged where? I stepped back inside, securing the door behind me. Olivia was exactly as I'd left her, still unconscious but breathing steadily. I added more wood to the stove, then settled in a chair beside her, determined to keep watch until dawn. Despite my resolve, exhaustion eventually overcame me. I dozed off, head nodding toward my chest. I woke to sunlight streaming through the dirty windows and the sound of Olivia's voice. "Emily, where are we?" I sat up quickly, disoriented. "A cabin. We found it after the fire." The events of the previous night came rushing back. "How are you feeling?" "Like I fell off a tower," she said with a weak smile. "But alive, thanks to you." I checked her injuries in the daylight. The head wound had stopped bleeding, and while her leg was swollen and bruised, the splint had held. "We need to get you to a hospital," I said. "Do you think you can move if I help you?" She nodded uncertainly. "I can try. Do you know where we are?" I didn't, but the morning light gave me hope we could find our way back to a main trail. "I have a compass. If we head south, we should eventually hit Seneca Creek. From there, we can follow it back toward the trailhead." As I helped Olivia sit up, I noticed a folded paper on the table, the note I'd found on the porch. But examining it now, I realized it wasn't the same paper. This one was newer, crisp white rather than yellowed with age. I picked it up with trembling fingers and unfolded it. Hollow Pines. Sunset. Bring her. The handwriting was different too. Bold, aggressive strokes rather than the spidery scrawl from last night. "What's that?" Olivia asked, noticing my expression. I crumpled the paper in my fist. "Nothing, just trying to figure out our location." Another lie, but I couldn't bear to frighten her more. We gathered what supplies we could, water, food, the first aid kit, and prepared to leave. I fashioned a crude crutch for Olivia from a piece of firewood, which helped her stand, though moving was slow and clearly painful. Outside, the cabin looked different in daylight, smaller, more decrepit than it had seemed at night. The porch steps sagged dangerously, and vines crept up the weathered walls. It looked abandoned, as it had in the most recent photograph inside. "Which way?" Olivia asked, leaning heavily on her makeshift crutch. I consulted my compass. "South, through those trees." We set off at a painfully slow pace. Every step was agony for Olivia, but she didn't complain, gritting her teeth and pushing forward. I kept one arm around her waist, supporting as much of her weight as I could. After about an hour of grueling progress, we reached what appeared to be an actual trail, narrow and overgrown, but definitely man-made. Relief washed over me. "This might connect to one of the main hiking routes," I said optimistically. We followed the trail, our pace slightly improving on the more even ground. The forest around us seemed less threatening in daylight, almost peaceful. Birds chirped overhead, and sunlight dappled the forest floor through the canopy. Around midday, we paused to rest. I helped Olivia sit on a fallen log while I distributed our meager rations, a granola bar each, and shared sips from a water bottle. We'd covered maybe 2 miles, I estimated. At this rate, it would take us all day to reach anywhere close to civilization. "Emily," Olivia said suddenly, her voice low, "don't turn around right away, but I think someone's watching us." My heart skipped a beat. As casually as I could, I pretended to stretch, using the movement to scan our surroundings. At first, I saw nothing. Then, a flash of movement between the trees about 50 yards back, a figure retreating behind a large oak. "I see them," I murmured. "Just one person, I think." "Derek?" Her voice quavered. I couldn't tell. I helped her to her feet. "Let's keep moving." We continued along the trail, my senses now hyper-alert to every sound in the forest. Whoever was following us made no attempt to catch up or reveal themselves, maintaining a distance of about 50 yards, just close enough to keep us in sight. The trail gradually widened, becoming better maintained. My hope grew as we walked. This had to lead somewhere significant. Around mid-afternoon, we emerged from the woods into a small grassy clearing dominated by a weathered wooden sign, Hollow Pines, 1 mile. My blood ran cold. Hollow Pines, the name from the note. Despite the warmth of the day, I shivered. "What's wrong?" Olivia asked, noticing my reaction. "Do you know this place?" I hesitated. "No, but it might be our best chance for help." What choice did we have? Olivia couldn't keep walking indefinitely with her injury, and night would fall again eventually. We followed the trail toward Hollow Pines, the sense of being watched intensifying with every step. Twice more I caught glimpses of our shadow, sometimes behind us, sometimes parallel, moving through the trees. Still, they made no move to confront us. The sun was low in the sky when we finally saw it, a collection of buildings nestled in a small valley. Hollow Pines wasn't marked on any of my maps, but it was undeniably a settlement of some kind. From our vantage point, I counted perhaps a dozen structures, mostly small cabins similar to the one we'd stayed in, arranged in a rough circle around what appeared to be a larger community building. "Thank God," Olivia breathed. "People." But as we drew closer, I began to notice troubling details. There were no vehicles visible, no power lines, no signs of motion or life, no smoke from chimneys, no laundry on lines, no residents moving between buildings. "Something's not right," I murmured, pausing at the edge of the tree line. "It looks abandoned." We stood there, uncertain as the sun sank lower. The note had specified sunset. Bring her. A trap, almost certainly. But what alternative did we have? Olivia needed medical attention, and we were lost in the wilderness. "We should go down there," Olivia said, wincing as she shifted her weight. "Even if no one lives there now, there might be supplies. A first aid station, maybe a radio." I nodded reluctantly. "Stay close to me." We descended into the valley slowly, the fading sunlight casting long shadows across our path. Up close, Hollow Pines was even more unsettling. The buildings were old, but eerily well-preserved, as if time had somehow moved differently here. Windows stared out like vacant eyes, curtains occasionally shifting though there was no breeze. "Hello," I called out as we reached the edge of the settlement. My voice echoed unnaturally, bouncing between the silent structures. "Is anyone here? We need help." Nothing. Not even birds or insects made a sound. The central building was larger than the others, a 2-story structure with a sagging porch and peeling white paint. A faded sign above the door read, "Hollow Pines General Store and Post." "There," I said, guiding Olivia toward it. "If there's any supplies or communication, it would be in there." The wooden steps creaked ominously as we climbed onto the porch. The door hung slightly ajar, as if inviting us in. I pushed it open carefully, revealing a dusty interior illuminated by the last rays of sunlight filtering through grimy windows. It was indeed a general store, or had been once. Shelves lined the walls, still stocked with faded cans and boxes. A counter ran along the back, an ancient cash register perched atop it. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust, except, I noticed with a chill, a clear path through the center of the floor where the dust had been disturbed recently. "Someone's been here," I whispered. Olivia gripped my arm. "Emily, look." She was pointing to the wall behind the counter. What I had initially taken for a decorative pattern was actually dozens, no, hundreds of photographs. They covered the entire wall, overlapping in places, creating a massive collage. And every single one showed the same thing: a woman with long, tangled gray hair in a tattered dress. The woman from the forest. The woman from the cabin photographs. I approached slowly, drawn by horrified fascination. The photos spanned decades, from yellowed 19th century portraits to what looked like modern digital prints. In the earliest, she appeared middle-aged. In the latest, elderly. But her expression never changed. A vacant, unsettling stare directly into the camera. "Who is she?" Olivia breathed. Before I could respond, a voice spoke from behind us. "That's Eleanor Pines." We whirled around. A man stood in the doorway, tall and gaunt, with a gray beard and eyes that seemed too light against his weathered skin. He wore a park ranger's uniform, though it looked worn and faded, the patches partially torn away. "I'm Ranger Matthias," he said, stepping into the store. "You folks are a long way from the marked trails." Relief flooded through me. Thank God. We need help. There was a fire at the old lookout tower. My friend fell. Her leg is broken. The ranger nodded, his expression unreadable. "I know. I've been tracking you since the tower." A chill ran through me. "You were following us?" "Had to make sure you found your way here." He glanced at the wall of photographs. Then back to us. "It's what Eleanor wanted." Olivia's grip on my arm tightened painfully. "What do you mean? Who is Eleanor Pines?" The ranger moved toward the counter, running his fingers along the dusty surface. "She founded this settlement back in 1879. Hollow Pines was named for her. She's been watching over these woods ever since." "That's not possible," I said, my mouth dry. "These photos span over 100 years." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "You've seen her, haven't you? Both of you." Neither of us answered, but our expressions must have confirmed it. "Eleanor has a way of finding people who belong here." His gaze settled on Olivia. "People who need a home." Outside, the sun had almost disappeared behind the mountains. The interior of the store grew darker, shadows stretching across the floor. "We need to get my friend to a hospital," I said firmly. "Do you have a vehicle? A radio?" "No one leaves Hollow Pines after sunset," the ranger replied matter-of-factly. "Eleanor's rules. But don't worry, we'll take good care of her." The way he said "her" made my skin crawl. "You're hurt," he continued, addressing Olivia directly for the first time. "Eleanor can help with that. She knows old ways of healing." "We're not staying here," I said, moving protectively in front of Olivia. "I don't know what's going on, but we're leaving. Now." The ranger's expression hardened. "I'm afraid that's not possible." He reached into his pocket, pulling out a folded piece of paper. "Eleanor left instructions. Bring her at sunset. You're right on time." It was the note, identical to the one I'd found in the cabin that morning. "You left that in the cabin," I said, realization dawning. He nodded. "Had to make sure you found your way here." "Why? What do you want with us?" "Not with you," he corrected, his gaze sliding past me to Olivia. "Just her. Eleanor's been waiting." That was when I noticed the photographs again, really looked at them. In the dimming light, something stood out that I hadn't seen before. In each photo, Eleanor Pines wasn't alone. Partially obscured, often blurred or standing in shadow behind her, was another figure, different in each image. Women of various ages, all with the same vacant expression as Eleanor herself. "What happened to them?" I whispered. "The women in the photos?" The ranger followed my gaze. "They became part of Hollow Pines, part of Eleanor." His voice took on a dreamy quality. "She needs them, you see, to stay, to persist." Outside, darkness had fallen completely. From somewhere in the settlement came a sound. The same keening wail we'd heard that first night by the creek. Olivia gasped. "Emily, we need to go. Now." I didn't need convincing. I grabbed her arm, supporting her weight as we backed toward the door. The ranger made no move to stop us, simply watching with that unsettling half-smile. "You won't get far," he said calmly. "The woods belong to Eleanor after dark. Always have." We burst out onto the porch, into the velvety darkness of night. The settlement had transformed. Lights glowed in windows that had been empty minutes before. Shadows moved between buildings, too tall, too fluid to be human. And, at the center of it all, standing in the middle of what passed for a town square, was a familiar figure in a tattered dress. Eleanor Pines. Even from this distance I could see her face clearly in the moonlight, gaunt and pale, with eyes that seemed to glow with an inner light. She raised one skeletal hand, pointing directly at Olivia. "Run!" I screamed, half carrying Olivia down the steps. We fled as fast as Olivia's injury would allow, heading for the trees at the edge of the settlement. Behind us, more wailing sounds erupted. Not just one voice now, but many, a chorus of inhuman cries that raised the hair on my neck. "They're coming," Olivia gasped, her face white with pain and terror. I glanced back. Dark figures were converging on us from all directions. Not just Eleanor and the ranger, but others, moving with an unnatural gliding motion across the ground. Some appeared solid, others translucent in the moonlight like photographs that had been damaged by water. We reached the tree line, plunging into the relative safety of the forest. But Olivia was weakening, her injured leg finally giving out. "I can't," she sobbed, collapsing against a tree trunk. "Emily, I can't go any further." The voices were closing in, flashlight beams dancing through the trees behind us. I made a split-second decision. "Hide here," I said, helping her into a hollow beneath some fallen logs. "I'll lead them away, then circle back for you." "No." She clutched at my arm. "Don't leave me, Emily, please." "I'll come back," I promised. "I swear, but I need to draw them away from you." Before she could protest further, I sprinted away, deliberately making as much noise as possible. "Hey!" I shouted. "Over here!" The lights changed direction, following me. I ran deeper into the forest, heart pounding, lungs burning. The terrain was unfamiliar, treacherous in the darkness. Roots and stones seemed to reach up to trip me. After what felt like miles, I stopped, listening. The sounds of pursuit had faded. I'd done it, drawn them away from Olivia. Now I just needed to circle back. I consulted my compass, trying to orient myself. The moon provided just enough light to make out the needle pointing north. I turned west, planning to arc back around to where I'd left Olivia. That was when I noticed the figure standing motionless between the trees about 20 yards ahead. Not Eleanor this time, but a man. Even in the dim moonlight, I recognized him instantly. Derek. "No," I whispered. "It's not possible." But it was him, Olivia's ex-husband, the man she'd been so desperate to escape. He stood perfectly still, watching me with an expression I couldn't read. "How did you find us?" I demanded, my voice shaking. He didn't answer, didn't move. The silence stretched between us, unbearable. "Answer me," I shouted, fear giving way to anger. "What are you doing here?" Still nothing. Unnerved, I took a step closer and gasped. In the moonlight filtering through the trees, I could see that Derek's eyes were wrong, vacant and glassy like a doll's, and his skin had a strange, translucent quality, as if I could almost see through it to the trees behind. This wasn't Derek, not really. Odd. It was something wearing his appearance like a poorly fitting suit. I backed away slowly. The thing that looked like Derek began to move, its motions jerky and unnatural. It opened its mouth as if to speak, but the sound that emerged was Eleanor's keening wail. I turned and ran. The forest blurred around me as I fled, branches whipping at my face, roots catching at my feet. I no longer knew which direction I was heading, only that I needed to get away from that thing. I thought of Olivia, waiting for me to return, and pushed myself harder. Without warning, the trees gave way to a small clearing. I skidded to a halt, momentarily disoriented by the sudden open space. In the center of the clearing stood a familiar structure, the cabin we'd sheltered in the previous night. Impossible. We'd walked for hours to reach Hollow Pines. There was no way I could have circled back to the cabin so quickly, unless the cabin had moved. Or unless the forest itself was changing around us, manipulating our path to lead us where Eleanor wanted us to go. A light glowed warmly in the cabin window. As I watched, a silhouette moved across it, a woman's figure, tall and thin. Eleanor. I backed away, ready to disappear into the trees again, when a sound stopped me. Olivia's voice, coming from inside the cabin. "Emily, is that you?" My blood froze. Olivia was supposed to be hidden beneath the fallen logs where I'd left her. How could she be here? Emily, help me, please. It was Olivia's voice, unmistakably. But it couldn't be her. It was a trap. It had to be. Then I heard a scream. Agonized, terrified, that could only be genuine. Trap or not, I couldn't ignore it. I ran toward the cabin, bursting through the door. Inside, the cabin looked exactly as we'd left it. The wood stove cold now, the first aid kit open on the table. And on the cot lay Olivia, her face contorted in pain. Her injured leg now bent at an even more unnatural angle. "Emily," she sobbed, reaching for me. "You came back." I rushed to her side, taking her hand. "How did you get here? I left you in the forest, miles from here." Confusion crossed her face. "What are you talking about? You never left me. You brought me here, don't you remember? You said we'd be safe." A chill ran through me. That wasn't what had happened. I had left her, had led the pursuers away. Hadn't I? "Olivia," I said slowly, "what's the last thing you remember, before being in this cabin?" She frowned. "The fire tower. It collapsed, and I fell. You carried me here." Her grip on my hand tightened. "Emily, you're scaring me. What's wrong?" Before I could answer, a gentle knock came at the cabin door. 3 taps, just as I'd heard the night before. "She's here," Olivia whispered, her eyes widening with terror. "She's been coming every hour, knocking like that." I didn't answer. I didn't know what to do. My mind raced. Nothing made sense. How had Olivia gotten here? Why were her memories different from mine? And if she'd been here all along, who had I left hidden under those logs? The knocking came again, more insistent. "Don't answer it," Olivia pleaded. "Emily, whatever you do, don't let her in." I moved to the window, peering through the grimy glass. Eleanor Pine stood on the porch, her gray hair moving in a non-existent breeze. She was more solid than I'd seen her before, almost corporeal in the moonlight. And beside her stood the Eleanor thing that looked like Derek, its features still frozen in that uncanny approximation of humanity. "They can't come in unless we invite them," Olivia said, her voice small and frightened. I remembered that much from the stories. The Hollow Pines hag can't enter a dwelling uninvited. I turned to her in surprise. "How do you know that name? The Hollow Pines hag?" A strange expression crossed Olivia's face, a mixture of confusion and something else, something that made my skin crawl. "I don't know," she said slowly. "It just came to me." The knocking had stopped. In its place came a voice, thin and reedy but clear enough to hear through the cabin walls. "Emily," Eleanor called. "I have something of yours, something precious." I froze. How did she know my name? "Look outside, Emily, see what I have." Against my better judgment, I moved back to the window. Eleanor still stood there, but now she held something in her arms, something that squirmed and struggled. With horror, I realized it was a person. A woman. Olivia. But that was impossible. Olivia was behind me, lying on the cot with her broken leg. I spun around to confirm, and yes, there she was, watching me with frightened eyes. "What is it?" she asked. "What do you see?" I turned back to the window. Outside, Eleanor still cradled the struggling form of Olivia, a cruel smile twisting her ancient face. The Olivia outside looked exactly like the one inside. Same clothes, same injuries, same terror in her eyes. "She's showing me you," I whispered. "But you're here. How can you be out there too?" "It's a trick," the Olivia on the cot insisted. "Don't believe anything you see out there." But doubt had crept in. I thought back to everything that had happened since the fire tower collapsed. The disorienting journey through the woods, finding Hollow Pines, the ranger's cryptic words about Eleanor needing people to stay. What if this wasn't Olivia at all? What if Eleanor had somehow created this copy, this perfect simulacrum, to trick me into letting her in? The knocking resumed, violent now, shaking the entire cabin. "Let me in, Emily," Eleanor's voice hissed through the cracks in the walls. "Let me in, or your friend dies." The Olivia on the cot grabbed my hand. "Don't do it. That's what she wants. She needs permission to cross the threshold." Her hand felt real in mine. Warm, solid, familiar. The callus on her index finger from years of guitar playing. The small scar across her knuckles from when we'd gone rock climbing in college. "How do I know you're really Olivia?" I asked, my voice breaking. Her eyes widened with hurt. "Em, it's me. How can you even ask that? Tell me something only Olivia would know, something from our past." She didn't hesitate. "Sophomore year, spring break. We drove to Virginia Beach in your mom's old Volvo. It broke down outside Richmond, and we spent the night singing karaoke in some dive bar called the Rusty Nail while we waited for a tow truck. You sang 'Total Eclipse of the Heart' so badly that the bartender paid us to leave." The memory was perfect, accurate in every detail. Relief washed over me. This was Olivia. My Olivia. The pounding on the door grew even more violent, the wood beginning to splinter. "She's going to get in whether we invite her or not," I realized aloud. "We have to get out of here." I looked around frantically for an escape route. The cabin had only the one door and two windows, both facing the front where Eleanor waited. The only other possibility was the root cellar I'd discovered the night before. "The cellar," I said, moving to the trap door in the floor. "We can hide down there." "No," Olivia cried, suddenly panicked. "Not down there. Please, Emily, anywhere but there." Her reaction took me aback. "Why not? What's wrong with the cellar?" She shook her head frantically. "I don't know. I have a bad feeling about it. Like something terrible is waiting down there." The door frame splintered further, one of the hinges tearing free from the wall. We were out of time and options. "I'm sorry," I said, pulling the trapdoor open. "It's our only chance." I helped Olivia up from the cot, supporting her weight as we moved toward the open hatch. The cellar below was pitch dark, the bottom invisible from where we stood. The cabin door exploded inward in a shower of splinters. Eleanor stood in the doorway, her figure silhouetted against the night sky. Behind her, I caught a glimpse of the Olivia copy she'd been holding, still struggling in the grip of the derrick thing. "Go," I urged, helping Olivia onto the ladder that led down into the darkness. "I'm right behind you." She descended reluctantly, whimpering with pain every time her injured leg bumped against a rung. I followed immediately after, pulling the trapdoor shut above us just as Eleanor glided into the cabin. We found ourselves in complete darkness. I fumbled for my flashlight, clicking it on to reveal a small earthen chamber about 8 feet square. Root vegetables and preserves lined crude shelves along one wall, just as I remembered. But there was something else now, something I hadn't noticed during my brief exploration the previous night. An old wooden chest stood against the far wall, secured with a rusted padlock. "What is that?" Olivia whispered, clinging to my arm. Before I could answer, dust sifted down from the ceiling as footsteps moved across the cabin floor above us. Eleanor was searching for us, and it wouldn't take her long to find the trap door. "We need to be quiet," I mouthed, switching off the flashlight. We huddled together in the darkness, scarcely daring to breathe. The footsteps continued overhead, slow and deliberate. Then they stopped, directly above the trap door. Silence stretched for what felt like eternity. Had she given up? Left the cabin to search elsewhere? Then came a sound that made my blood run cold, the slow, methodical turning of the metal ring embedded in the trap door. "She found us," Olivia breathed. In desperation, I switched the flashlight back on, sweeping it around the cellar. There had to be another way out. A tunnel, a secondary entrance, anything. The beam illuminated only solid earth walls on 3 sides. But the fourth wall behind the wooden chest looked different. The dirt there seemed fresher, less packed down. "Help me with this," I whispered, moving to the chest. Together, we dragged it aside, revealing what I'd suspected. A rough hole dug into the earth wall, barely large enough for a person to crawl through. The trapdoor above us began to lift. "Go," I urged, pushing Olivia toward the tunnel. "Crawl through." She hesitated only a moment before dropping to her hands and knees, dragging her injured leg behind her as she disappeared into the darkness. I followed immediately after, my flashlight gripped between my teeth. The tunnel was nightmare-inducing, tight, earthen, the ceiling so low I had to army crawl on my stomach. The smell of damp soil filled my nostrils, and more than once I felt things squirming beneath my palms that I tried not to think about. Ahead, I could hear Olivia's labored breathing as she forced herself forward despite her injuries. Behind us came sounds of pursuit, the soft scrape of fabric against earth, the disturbing absence of breathing or grunting effort that would mark a human follower. "Keep going," I gasped to Olivia. "Don't stop for anything." The tunnel seemed endless, twisting and turning through the earth. My shoulders scraped against the narrow walls, and claustrophobia clawed at the edges of my mind. Just when I thought I couldn't bear another moment in that suffocating passage, Olivia's voice came from ahead. "I see light." Sure enough, a faint glow appeared in the distance. We redoubled our efforts, scrambling toward it with desperate energy. The tunnel widened slightly as we approached the exit, allowing us to move faster. Finally, Olivia disappeared through the opening. I followed seconds later, emerging into the cool night air with overwhelming relief. We were outside again. But where? My flashlight revealed a small clearing surrounded by dense forest. At its center stood a circle of standing stones, each about 4 feet tall, arranged in a perfect ring. They looked ancient, covered in lichen and weathered by countless years of exposure. "What is this place?" Olivia whispered, her voice tinged with awe and fear. Before I could answer, movement at the tunnel entrance caught my attention. Eleanor was emerging, her tall, gaunt form unfolding from the opening with unnatural grace. Behind her came others, the ranger, the derrick thing, and more shadowy figures I couldn't make out clearly. "The stones," I gasped, pulling Olivia toward the circle. "Get inside the circle." I didn't know why I said it. The words came to me instinctively, as if I'd always known the standing stones would protect us. Olivia didn't question me, limping alongside as we stumbled into the center of the ring. Eleanor and her followers reached the edge of the circle but stopped there, unwilling or unable to cross the boundary marked by the ancient stones. They began to pace the perimeter instead, like wolves circling prey. "They can't come in," Olivia said wonderingly. "The stones are protecting us." I wasn't sure how long that protection would last, but I was grateful for the momentary reprieve. I checked Olivia's injuries. Her leg looked worse, the splint coming loose during our desperate crawl through the tunnel. She was pale with pain, her skin clammy to the touch. "We need to get you out of here," I said. "Find our way back to the trailhead somehow." "How?" she asked, gesturing to the figures surrounding us. "We're trapped." She was right. Even if the stones kept Eleanor and her followers at bay, we couldn't stay here forever. Eventually, we would have to leave the circle, and they would be waiting. That was when I noticed the carving on the central stone directly in front of us. Raising my flashlight, I examined the weathered symbols etched into its surface. They weren't in any language I recognized, but something about them seemed almost familiar, as if I should understand their meaning. Olivia gasped. "I know what that is." I turned to her in surprise. "You do?" She nodded, her expression strange. "It's a binding spell, a way to trap something that doesn't belong in our world." "How could you possibly know that?" I asked, disbelief coloring my voice. Olivia's eyes met mine, and for an instant, just an instant, they seemed different, older, knowing. Then she blinked and she was just Olivia again, looking confused and frightened. "I don't know," she whispered. The knowledge was just there. Outside the circle, Eleanor had stopped pacing. She stood directly opposite us now, her ancient eyes fixed on Olivia with terrible intensity. When she spoke, her voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. She remembers, Eleanor said, her words like dry leaves rustling in the wind. She's beginning to remember. Remember what? I demanded. What have you done to her? Eleanor's lips curved in what might have been a smile on a human face. I've done nothing. She's doing it to herself, coming home, piece by piece. Olivia clutched my arm, her fingers digging painfully into my flesh. Emily, I don't understand what's happening to me. I turned to her, taking her face in my hands. Listen to me. Whatever she's saying, whatever you think you remember, it's not real. She's playing mind games with us. But even as I said the words, doubt crept in. The way Olivia had known about the Hollow Pines hag, how she'd recognized the symbols on the stone, the strange flashes of knowledge that seemed to come from nowhere. Tell her, Eleanor called, her voice almost gleeful now. Tell her who you really are, child. Olivia's eyes filled with tears. I don't know what she's talking about. She's lying, I told her firmly. Don't listen. Eleanor began to circle the stones again, moving slowly, deliberately. You were born here, Olivia. Born in Hollow Pines, nearly 200 years ago. My daughter, my flesh and blood. I felt Olivia stiffen beside me. That's impossible. Is it? Eleanor stopped again, her eyes burning like twin coals in the darkness. Why do you think you were drawn back here? Why do you think you convinced your friend to bring you to these woods, to this place? The trip was my idea, I said. I suggested it to help Olivia after her divorce. Did you? Eleanor's voice was soft, knowing. Or did she plant the suggestion in your mind? Make you think it was your idea all along? I looked at Olivia, suddenly uncertain. Had it been my idea? I remembered calling her, suggesting the hiking trip. But before that, hadn't she mentioned wanting to get away? Hadn't she specifically asked about the Monongahela National Forest? Emily, don't listen to her, Olivia pleaded. She's trying to turn us against each other. But the seed of doubt had been planted. I took a small step back, regarding my friend with new eyes. How did you know about the binding spell, Olivia? How did you know the name Hollow Pines Hag? Panic flashed across her face. I don't know. I told you, it just came to me. Yes, Eleanor whispered, memories returning. My daughter coming back to me at last. I'm not your daughter, Olivia screamed at the ancient woman. I'm Olivia Bailey. I was born in Pittsburgh in 1991. I have parents, a family, a life. You have the life you chose to create, Eleanor replied calmly. The life you've been living, over and over for nearly 2 centuries. Running away, forgetting who you are, creating new identities. But always, eventually, returning to Hollow Pines. I remembered the photographs in the general store, hundreds of them, spanning decades. Always Eleanor, always with another woman partially visible behind her. Different women in each photo. Or was it the same woman, appearing different each time? The women in the photographs, I said slowly, they were all… You? I turned to Olivia, whose face had gone deathly pale. Eleanor nodded. Every 25 years, she runs, creates a new life, a new identity, convinces herself she's someone else, but the blood calls her back eventually. The hollow claims its own. Stop it, Olivia sobbed. Stop lying. But I could see the doubt in her eyes now, too. The terrible fear that maybe, just maybe, Eleanor was telling the truth. If what you're saying is true, I said to Eleanor, then why show yourself as Derek earlier? Why terrorize us in the forest? Not me, Eleanor replied. Her. She pointed at Olivia. Parts of her fighting to return. Parts of her fighting to stay hidden. Her own mind created the threats, the obstacles. Her own power shaped the forest around you. I remembered how disorienting our journey had been, how we'd somehow circled back to the cabin despite walking for hours in the opposite direction, the way paths appeared and disappeared. Had Olivia been unconsciously manipulating our surroundings all along? "Emily, please," Olivia begged, reaching for me. "You know me. We've been friends since college. We have 8 years of memories together." But did we? I searched my mind, trying to remember when we'd first met. Freshman orientation? No, it was a psychology class sophomore year. Or was it at that party, junior year? The memories seemed to shift and blur the harder I tried to focus on them. "Your memories aren't real," Eleanor said, as if reading my thoughts. "She created them, wove them into your mind like she's done with so many others. Friends, family, lovers, all constructs to support the illusion of her fabricated life." "That's not true," I insisted, but my voice lacked conviction. "I have photos of us together. Social media posts going back years." "All created after the fact," Eleanor replied. "Look closely at those memories, Emily. You'll find they don't hold up to scrutiny." I tried to remember Olivia's parents, whom I'd supposedly met at graduation. Their faces were blurry, indistinct. I couldn't recall their names or any specific conversations we'd had. "The binding is breaking down," Eleanor continued. "It always does. Eventually. That's why she brought you here, not to escape her ex-husband, but because the hollow was calling her home. She knew it was time to return." Olivia had collapsed to her knees in the center of the stone circle, sobbing uncontrollably. "Make it stop," she pleaded. "Emily, make her stop." I knelt beside her, torn between my instinct to comfort my friend and the growing, terrible suspicion that everything I thought I knew about her might be a lie. "If what you're saying is true," I said to Eleanor, "then what happens now? What do you want from us?" Eleanor's expression softened slightly, the first human emotion I'd seen on that ancient face. "I want my daughter to come home, to accept who she is, what she is." "And what exactly is that?" I asked. "Power," Eleanor replied simply. "Old power. The Hollow has always been a place of power, and our family its guardians. But guardianship requires sacrifice, requires binding." She gestured to the stone circle around us. "This is where it happens, where she must choose, every 25 years, to stay and serve as guardian, or to flee and forget until the Hollow calls her back again." Olivia had grown quiet, her sobs subsiding into silence. When she spoke, her voice was different, deeper, with an archaic cadence I'd never heard from her before. "I remember," she said softly. "God help me. I remember it all." She looked up at me, and her eyes had changed again, ancient now, filled with a knowledge no 30-year-old could possess. "My name was Eleanor Rose Pines," she said in that strange new voice. "I was born in 1842 in this hollow. My mother was the guardian before me, and her mother before her. We protected the hollow from what lies beneath." She gestured to the ground beneath us. A doorway, a threshold between worlds that must never be opened. I shook my head in disbelief. "Olivia, this isn't you. She's getting inside your head somehow." "I ran," she continued as if I hadn't spoken. "I always run. Create a new life, new memories, convince myself I'm someone else. But the hollow always calls me back when the binding weakens." Her gaze shifted to the older Eleanor standing outside the stone circle. "When she needs me to renew it." "The binding requires sacrifice," the elder Eleanor called. "Blood of our blood, flesh of our flesh." "No," I said firmly, gripping Olivia's shoulders. "Whatever this is, whatever they want you to believe, you don't have to accept it. You're Olivia Bailey, my friend. The woman who taught guitar at the community center on weekends, who cried during Pixar movies and always burns microwave popcorn." Her expression softened briefly at my words, a flicker of recognition passing across her face. "Emily." "Yes," I pressed. "Remember who you are. All those memories we share, they're real. They have to be real." The elder Eleanor hissed, a sound of pure frustration. "The binding must be renewed. The hollow demands it." Olivia's face contorted in pain. "It hurts," she whispered, "remembering both lives. being both people at once. "Then choose," I urged. "Choose to be Olivia." "I can't," she moaned. "The hollow won't let me. Not here, not at the center of its power." She clutched at my arm. "You have to take me away from here, far away." I nodded, determination surging through me. "We'll get out. Somehow." The elder Eleanor and her followers continued to circle the stones, their patience seemingly endless. They knew Olivia was wavering, knew we couldn't stay in the stone circle forever. "There has to be a way past them," I muttered, scanning our surroundings. The stone circle stood on raised ground, the clearing falling away gently on all sides. Beyond the clearing was forest, dense, dark, and disorienting, but potentially offering cover for escape. Olivia tugged at my sleeve, her eyes suddenly sharp with urgent purpose. "There's a way," she whispered. "A secret only the Guardian knows." "What is it?" I asked. She pointed to the carved stone in front of us, the one with the cryptic symbols. "This isn't just a binding spell, it's a key." Her fingers traced the strange markings. "If blood of the Guardian touches these runes in the right sequence, it creates a disruption, a momentary weakening of the Hollow's power." "You mean we could escape during that disruption?" Hope flared in my chest. She nodded. "But it comes at a price. Using the key feeds the Hollow strengthens it in the long run. It's meant only for emergencies." I glanced at the figures circling us. "I'd say this qualifies." Olivia hesitated. "If I do this, it means acknowledging who I am, who I was, taking a step toward accepting the Guardian's role." "You can deal with that after we're safe," I insisted. "Right now, we just need to get out of here." She closed her eyes, clearly struggling with the decision. When she opened them again, determination had replaced the fear. "Help me up." I supported her as she hobbled to the carved stone. Without hesitation, she drew her pocket knife and sliced across her palm, blood welling immediately from the wound. "Cover your eyes," she warned. "When it happens, the light is intense." I did as she instructed, turning my face away as she pressed her bleeding palm against the stone and began to trace the symbols in a specific pattern, whispering words in a language I didn't recognize. The air around us grew heavy, charged with static electricity that made the hair on my arms stand on end. A high-pitched whine filled my ears, growing louder until it was almost unbearable. Then came the light, visible even through my closed eyelids, a searing brightness that seemed to pierce directly into my brain. The ground beneath us trembled, and the air itself seemed to tear like fabric. When I dared to look again, the scene had changed dramatically. The elder Eleanor and her followers were scattered on the ground outside the circle, as if thrown back by an invisible force. A swirling vortex of mist had formed at one edge of the clearing, distorting the air like a heat mirage. "There," Olivia gasped, clearly weakened by whatever she'd just done. "That's our way out, a path that leads directly back to the main trail. But we have to hurry, it won't last long." I didn't question her. Supporting her weight, I helped her limp toward the strange distortion. Behind us, the elder Eleanor was already struggling to her feet, her face contorted with rage. "Stop them!" she shrieked, her voice no longer human. We reached the misty vortex just as the nearest followers began to recover. Without hesitation, we plunged into it, and everything changed. The air turned frigid, our breath visible in crystalline puffs. Sounds became muted, distant. The forest around us appeared monochromatic, as if drained of color. But straight ahead, a clear path stretched before us, unnaturally straight compared to the twisting trails we'd been following for days. "Keep moving," Olivia urged, her voice echoing strangely in the altered atmosphere. "They can't follow us through the shortcut, but it's collapsing behind us." I glanced back and saw she was right. The path we'd just traversed was dissolving, melting away like ice in sunlight. Beyond it, distorted figures raged at the rapidly closing entrance to this strange passageway. We hurried forward as fast as Olivia's injury would allow. The path seemed to compress space somehow, Landmarks I recognized from our original hike appeared and disappeared with impossible speed. In minutes, we had traversed what should have been miles. Suddenly, the air shimmered before us, and we stumbled out onto a familiar trail, the main hiking path leading back to the Seneca Creek trailhead where we'd left our car. "We did it," I breathed, hardly daring to believe our luck. Olivia nodded weakly. The effort of creating the escape route had clearly drained her. Her face was ashen, her breathing labored. "We need to get you to a hospital," I said, adjusting my grip to better support her weight. The trail ahead was mercifully downhill and well-maintained. Even with Olivia's injury, we made good progress. The farther we got from the stone circle, the more the tension eased from her body, as if physical distance was weakening whatever hold the hollow had on her. After about an hour of careful hiking, the trees thinned and the welcome sight of the parking area came into view. Our car sat where we'd left it, looking almost absurdly normal after everything we'd experienced. "Never thought I'd be so happy to see that rusty old Subaru," I said, trying to lighten the mood. Olivia managed a weak smile. "Emily," she said hesitantly, "I need to tell you something about what happened back there." "Later," I interrupted gently. "When you're safe, when we're far away from this place, then we can talk about it." She looked like she wanted to object, but nodded instead, allowing me to help her into the passenger seat. I settled her as comfortably as possible, adjusting the seat to accommodate her injured leg. As I walked around to the driver's side, a movement at the edge of the forest caught my eye. I froze, keys in hand. The elder Eleanor stood among the trees, too far away to reach us but close enough that I could clearly see her face. Our eyes met across the distance and a chill ran through me. She wasn't angry anymore. She was smiling. I quickly got into the car and started the engine, trying to shake off the unsettling image. The elder Eleanor made no move to approach as we pulled out of the parking area and onto the access road that would lead us back to civilization. Olivia remained silent as we drove, her gaze fixed on the passing landscape. Only when the forest had given way to farmland did she finally speak. "She let us go," she said quietly. I glanced at her. "What do you mean?" "Eleanor. She could have stopped us at the end. The Hollow's power extends to the boundaries of the forest." Olivia turned to face me, her expression troubled. "She let us leave because she knows I'll be back." "You don't have to go back," I insisted. "Whatever happened there, whatever you think you remembered, it doesn't define you." She gave me a sad smile. "You still don't understand, do you? The memories are real, Emily. Both sets of them. I am Olivia Bailey, but I'm also Eleanor Rose Pines." "That's impossible," I said, though with less conviction than before. "Is it?" She looked down at her hand, the one she'd cut to activate the stone. The wound had already closed, leaving not even a scar. "Normal people don't heal like this." I had no response to that. "The binding weakens every 25 years, she continued. "That's why Eleanor created me, this version of me. I go out into the world, live a normal life for a while, but when the binding needs renewal, the Hollow calls me back." "So that's what will happen?" I asked, a knot forming in my stomach. "In 25 years you'll be drawn back there?" She shook her head. "Not 25 years. The key I used, it accelerated the cycle, and I didn't complete the renewal ritual." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I have months, at most." "There has to be a way to break it," I said, desperation creeping into my voice. "Some way to sever your connection to that place permanently." "Maybe," but she didn't sound convinced. "I need time to think, to sort through these memories." We reached the nearest town as evening fell, a small community called Petersburg where, miraculously, my cell phone found service. I called 911, and within minutes, an ambulance arrived to take Olivia to the local hospital. I followed in my car, my mind still struggling to process everything that had happened. Part of me desperately wanted to believe it had all been some kind of shared hallucination, the product of fear exhaustion, and injury. But I couldn't deny what I'd seen, what I'd heard, the impossible healing of Olivia's cut palm. At the hospital, I gave the doctors a simplified version of events: a hiking accident, a fire at an old lookout tower, a fall. They didn't question our story, too busy dealing with Olivia's broken leg and mild concussion. X-rays confirmed what we already knew: a clean break that would require surgery to properly set. While Olivia was in surgery, I sat in the waiting room, staring at my phone. I'd pulled up old photos of us together, trips we'd taken, parties we'd attended. They looked real. How could they not be real? Yet when I tried to remember the specific events surrounding each photo, details blurred and shifted. A text message interrupted my spiral of doubt. "I know what you saw in the hollow. Call me. We need to talk." The number wasn't one I recognized. "Who is this?" I texted back. The reply came immediately: "Ranger Matthias." My blood ran cold. The ranger from Hollow Pines, the gaunt man in the faded uniform who had led us to Eleanor. How had he gotten my number? Against my better judgment, I stepped outside the hospital and called the number. He answered on the first ring. "Emily." His voice sounded normal, human, nothing like the eerie, dreamlike quality it had possessed in the hollow. "What do you want?" I demanded. "To help?" he replied simply. "I'm not what you think I am." "And what's that?" "One of Eleanor's puppets." He sighed, a weary sound. "I was like you once, drawn into the hollow's web through someone I cared about, someone who wasn't who I thought they were." I leaned against the hospital wall, suddenly lightheaded. "Who are you, really?" "A researcher. I've been studying the Hollow Pines phenomenon for years. The cycle of disappearances every 25 years. The legends of the Guardian family." His voice grew urgent. "Your friend. She triggered the key without completing the renewal, didn't she?" "How do you know about that?" "Because it's happened before. In 1923 and again in 1972. Each time the Hollow's power leaked out into the surrounding forest, causing anomalies." "What kind of anomalies?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. "Distortions in time and space, manifestations, people disappearing." He paused. "The Hollow is hungry, Emily, and your friend just woke it up without feeding it." A chill ran through me. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying she's opened a door that can't be easily closed, and the longer it stays open, the more power seeps through." "How do we close it?" I asked. His laugh was bitter. "That's the question, isn't it? Traditionally, only a guardian can seal the threshold through the binding ritual at the stone circle." "Which means Olivia has to go back," I said, my heart sinking. "Yes, but she doesn't have to go alone." His voice softened. "Meet me. Let me show you what I've learned. Maybe together we can find another way." I hesitated. After everything that had happened, trust didn't come easily. "How do I know this isn't another trap?" "You don't," he admitted. "But consider this. If I were still under Eleanor's control, why would I be offering to help you fight her?" It was a fair point, but not entirely convincing. "I need time to think about it, and to talk to Olivia when she's out of surgery." "Don't wait too long," he warned. "The effects are already starting. Check the local news." The call ended. Immediately, I pulled up a news app on my phone. The top story made my stomach drop. "Strange phenomena reported near Monongahela National Forest. Hikers missing. Unusual weather patterns." According to the article, 3 hikers had vanished from trails near Seneca Creek in the past 24 hours. Strange lights had been spotted in the forest at night, and, most disturbing of all, animals were behaving oddly. Birds flying in perfect geometric patterns, deer standing motionless for hours, staring at nothing. It was starting. Whatever Olivia had unleashed by using the key without completing the ritual, its effects were spreading. I went back inside to wait for Olivia to emerge from surgery, my mind racing with terrible possibilities. When the doctor finally came to tell me the procedure had been successful, I felt a momentary relief that was quickly overshadowed by larger concerns. "She's in recovery now," the doctor explained. "The break was clean, and we've inserted a titanium rod to stabilize it. She should regain full mobility with time and physical therapy." "When can I see her?" I asked. "She's still under sedation, but you can sit with her if you'd like. She'll probably be groggy when she wakes." I followed the doctor to a small recovery room where Olivia lay, her leg elevated and encased in a temporary cast. Her face was peaceful in sleep, giving no hint of the ancient entity that might share her consciousness. I sat beside her bed, watching the steady rise and fall of her chest. Was she really my friend Olivia? Or was she Eleanor Rose Pines, wearing Olivia like a costume? Or somehow, impossibly, both? Hours passed. Night fell. I dozed in the uncomfortable hospital chair, waking with a start when Olivia finally stirred. "Em?" Her voice was scratchy, her eyes unfocused from the anesthesia. "I'm here," I said, moving to take her hand. "Surgery went well. Your leg's going to be fine." She nodded vaguely, clearly still affected by the medication. Then her expression sharpened suddenly, her grip on my hand tightening. "The hollow," she whispered. "I can feel it, even here." "Olivia." "It's angry," she continued, her voice taking on that strange, archaic quality I'd heard in the stone circle. "Hungry. I woke it without feeding it." "Ranger Matthias called me," I said quietly. "He says he wants to help." Her eyes widened. "Matthias? He's not one of them." "Apparently not. He says he's been researching the hollow for years." She closed her eyes, seeming to retreat into herself. When she spoke again, her voice was more normal, more Olivia. "I don't know who to trust anymore, Emily, not even myself." "Trust me," I said firmly. "Whatever happens, whatever you are or were, you're my friend now, and I'm not abandoning you." A tear slipped down her cheek. "You should. Run far away from me and never look back. It's the only way you'll be safe." "Safe isn't worth much if it means leaving you to face this alone." I squeezed her hand. "We'll figure it out together." She didn't argue, but the doubt in her eyes was clear. We sat in silence for a while, the weight of impossible revelations hanging between us. Finally, Olivia spoke again, her voice barely audible. "There might be a way." "A way to what?" "To end it, permanently." She met my gaze, her eyes now fully lucid. Not just to renew the binding, but to close the threshold for good. Hope flared in my chest. How? She swallowed hard. The guardian sacrifice. The ritual can be completed differently. Instead of binding the threshold for another cycle, the guardian can become the seal itself. My blood ran cold as I realized what she was suggesting. No, absolutely not. "It's the only permanent solution," she insisted. "As long as I live, the hollow has a connection to this world, a way to reach through." "There has to be another option," I said firmly. "That's why we should talk to Matthias. See what he knows." She didn't look convinced, but nodded weakly. "Okay, but promise me something." "What?" "If there isn't another way, if the only solution is what I suggested, promise you'll help me do it." I couldn't answer. The thought of helping Olivia sacrifice herself was unbearable, even if she was partly Eleanor Pines, even if she was something I didn't fully understand. "Emily," she pressed, "promise me. The hollow can't be allowed to break free. You've seen only a fraction of what it can do." "I promise to help you," I said carefully, "but not to help you die. We find another way, or we find a way to live with this." She seemed to accept this compromise, at least for now, and her eyes drifted closed again as exhaustion claimed her. I stepped outside to call Matthias back. Whatever he knew, however he might help, it was time to find out. "I'll meet with you," I said when he answered, "but I choose the place, somewhere public." "That's fine. he agreed readily, but sooner is better than later. We arranged to meet the following morning at a diner in Petersburg. I returned to Olivia's room to find her sleeping peacefully again. Pulling my chair closer to her bed, I settled in for the night, too wired and worried to consider finding a hotel. In the darkest hours before dawn, I was jolted awake by Olivia's voice, but not Olivia's words. "The hollow claims its own," she was saying, her voice once again carrying that archaic cadence. Her eyes were open but unseeing, fixed on the ceiling. Blood calls to blood. The threshold weakens. "Olivia," I whispered, taking her hand. "Wake up." Her head turned toward me, but her gaze remained distant, unfocused. "Emily Hall," she said, and a chill ran through me at the formal use of my full name. "You should not have interfered. The cycle must continue." This wasn't Olivia speaking. It was something else, something using her voice. "Who am I talking to?" I demanded, keeping my voice low to avoid alerting the hospital staff. A smile curved her lips, cold and unfamiliar on Olivia's face. "You know who I am?" "Eleanor," I whispered. The smile widened. "Part of me, the part that endures, the part that guards. What do you want?" "For her to return, to complete what she started." Eleanor's voice emanated from Olivia's mouth with eerie precision. The key was turned, the door cracked open. "It must be sealed again." "There has to be another way," I insisted, "one that doesn't require her to sacrifice herself." Eleanor laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "There is always sacrifice, Emily Hall. That is the nature of guardianship. The question is only what form it takes." Her expression grew serious. She knows what must be done. Deep down, she has always known. Olivia's body suddenly went rigid, her back arching off the bed as if in pain. Then she collapsed, gasping, her eyes once again her own. "Emily?" Her voice was normal, frightened. "What happened? I was somewhere else, somewhere dark." I squeezed her hand reassuringly. "It's okay. You were talking in your sleep." But we both knew it was more than that. Whatever connection existed between Olivia and Eleanor Pines, it was growing stronger. The boundary between them was dissolving. Morning came with no further incidents. Olivia was quiet as nurses checked her vitals and brought breakfast. I used the opportunity to shower in the small adjacent bathroom and change into clean clothes from my car. "I'm meeting Matthias in an hour," I told her as I gathered my things. "Will you be okay here alone?" She nodded. "I'm safe here, for now." She gripped my arm suddenly. "Be careful, Emily. Trust nothing he says without proof." I promised to be cautious and left, my mind heavy with worry. The diner was only a few blocks from the hospital, a retro chrome and vinyl establishment that had probably looked the same for 50 years. I arrived early, choosing a booth with a clear view of both exits and the parking lot. Matthias arrived precisely on time. In daylight, dressed in civilian clothes, jeans and a flannel shirt, he looked remarkably normal. Only his unusually pale eyes hinted at something different, something that had seen things most people hadn't. "Thank you for meeting me," he said, sliding into the booth across from me. "You said you could help," I replied. "So, help." He nodded, seeming to appreciate my directness. "First, you need to understand what we're dealing with. The Hollow isn't just a place, it's an anomaly, a weak point between our reality and something else." "Something else like what?" He spread his hands. "That's the question, isn't it? The indigenous people who first inhabited the region called it the Hungry Place. Early European settlers named it the Devil's Throat. Whatever it is, it wants in. And the Pines family? They've been, keeping it contained? Exactly. For generations, the women of the family have served as guardians, performing a ritual every 25 years to maintain the binding that keeps the threshold sealed." He leaned forward. "But the price of that binding is high. It requires sacrifice, a piece of the guardian's soul, essentially, a little more each time. That's why Eleanor created Olivia, I said, understanding dawning. To live a normal life, away from the hollow. Matthias nodded. The Guardian fragments herself, creates a separate identity that can exist in the world while the original remains bound to the hollow. But eventually, the two must reunite for the binding to be renewed. And if it isn't renewed, his expression darkened. Then the threshold opens completely. What's on the other side comes through. What exactly is on the other side? I asked, dreading the answer. I don't know for certain, he admitted. But based on historical accounts of times when the binding weakened, it's nothing good. Shapeless entities that consume everything they touch. Distortions in the fabric of reality itself. People turned inside out, physically and mentally. I shuddered, remembering the strange, not quite human followers that had surrounded Eleanor in the hollow. There has to be a way to end this for good. The Guardian can become the seal, Matthias said quietly, a final sacrifice that closes the threshold permanently. My heart sank. This was exactly what Olivia had suggested, the solution I'd hoped Matthias would help us avoid. No, I said firmly, that's not an option. He regarded me with sympathy. I understand your reluctance. She's your friend, but you have to consider what's at stake. I am considering it, I snapped. And I'm also considering that you're the only source for this information. How do I know you're telling the truth? How do I know this isn't some elaborate manipulation to get Olivia back to the hollow? To my surprise, he smiled. Good. You should be skeptical. He reached into his bag and pulled out a thick, leather-bound journal. This is my research. 30 years of studying the hollow, the Pines family, and the cycle of disappearances. It includes newspaper accounts dating back to the 1800s, interviews with locals, and my own observations. He pushed the journal across the table. Take it, read it, verify what you can, then decide whether to trust me. I hesitated, then took the journal. Why are you doing this? Why help us? His face grew solemn. Because 40 years ago, my sister was one of the disappeared. She went hiking in the Monongahela and never came back. The official report said she was lost, probably fell into a ravine, but I found her backpack at the edge of Hollow Pines. I'm sorry, I said, meaning it. He nodded in acknowledgement. I've been trying to understand what happened ever since, and trying to find a way to end it. Have you? Found a way, I mean? Maybe. He looked uncertain for the first time. There's a reference in some of the older accounts to something called the anchor, a physical object that might serve as an alternative focus for the binding spell. What kind of object? That's the problem. The accounts aren't specific, just that it would need to be something of significant emotional value to the Guardian, something they would willingly sacrifice. It wasn't much, but it was the first hint of an alternative I'd heard. And this anchor could replace the need for Olivia to sacrifice herself? Theoretically, he cautioned, but finding it won't be easy. If it exists, it would be somewhere in the hollow, probably hidden by previous Guardians. Which meant returning to Hollow Pines, the last place I wanted to go. But if there was even a chance it could save Olivia… We'll need time, I said. Olivia just had surgery. She can't travel for weeks. Matthias frowned. We may not have weeks. The effects of the weakened threshold are accelerating. You've seen the news reports? I nodded grimly. That's just the beginning, he warned. The anomalies will spread, intensify. Then we'll have to find another solution in the meantime, something to strengthen the binding temporarily. There might be a way, he said slowly. A stopgap measure. Not a permanent fix, but something to buy us time. He flipped through his journal, finding a specific page. Here, a ritual that was apparently used in 1923 when a similar situation occurred. It requires the Guardian's blood and something called Tears of the Hollow, spring water from a specific location in Hollow Pines. I can get Olivia's blood easily enough, I said. "But the spring water." "I'll go," he offered. "I know where it is." I studied him, still not entirely sure I could trust him. "Bring the water here. I don't want Olivia anywhere near that place until she's strong enough to face whatever's waiting." He agreed, and we spent the next hour going over the details of the temporary binding ritual. It wasn't complicated, but it needed to be performed precisely, at midnight under the new moon, which conveniently happened to be tonight. "I'll be back before sunset," Matthias promised as we parted, "with the water and everything else we need." I returned to the hospital, Matthias's journal tucked under my arm. Olivia was awake, looking better than she had the previous night. Some color had returned to her cheeks and her eyes were clear. "How did it go?" she asked as soon as I entered. I told her everything, Matthias's explanation of the hollow, the possibility of an anchor that could serve as an alternative sacrifice, and the temporary binding ritual that might buy us time. "The anchor," she murmured, a distant look in her eyes. "Yes, I remember. Something. Stories my mother, Eleanor's mother, used to tell." "Then it's real?" I asked eagerly. "I think so. But finding it—" She shook her head. "The hollow isn't a fixed place, Emily. It shifts, changes, especially now, with the threshold weakening." "We'll worry about that later," I said. "First, let's focus on this temporary binding. If it works, it gives us time to figure out the rest." Olivia nodded slowly. "It could work. But Emily, understand what you're getting into. This kind of magic, because that's what it is, a form of magic, it has consequences. Performing the ritual will connect you to the hollow too." "I don't care," I said firmly. "I'm not letting you face this alone." She smiled sadly. "Always the protector, even back in college." "That's what friends do," I replied simply. As evening approached, I made preparations for the ritual. Olivia provided specific instructions, drawing on memories that seemed to surface more readily now. We would need a circle of salt, specific words to be spoken, and, most importantly, a mixture of her blood with the spring water Matthias was bringing. "The blood must be freely given," she emphasized, "and mixed with the water under moonlight." I nodded, memorizing every detail. This had to work. It had to buy us time to find a permanent solution. Matthias returned as promised, just as the sun was setting. He brought with him a small glass vial of clear water, tears of the hollow, along with other supplies for the ritual, black candles, a silver bowl, and a knife with strange symbols etched into its blade. "Everything's ready," he said. "We should perform the ritual outside, away from the hospital." I hesitated. I don't want to leave Olivia alone. "I'll be fine," she assured me. "The hollow can't reach me directly yet. It needs Eleanor for that, and she's still bound to the stone circle." Reluctantly, I agreed. Matthias and I found a secluded spot behind the hospital, a small garden area that was deserted at this late hour. As the clock approached midnight, we laid out the ritual items according to Olivia's instructions. "The blood," Matthias reminded me. I produced a small syringe I'd taken from the hospital supplies. It contained a few milliliters of Olivia's blood, drawn earlier under the guise of checking her hemoglobin levels. The new moon made the night especially dark, the garden illuminated only by the black candles Matthias had arranged in a circle. In the center, he placed the silver bowl and poured in the spring water from his vial. "Now, the blood," he instructed. 3 drops only. I carefully added 3 drops of Olivia's blood to the water. The moment they touched the surface, something strange happened. The water began to glow with a faint blue luminescence, swirling of its own accord. "Begin the incantation," Matthias said, his voice tight with anticipation. I recited the words Olivia had taught me, an ancient language that felt strange on my tongue but somehow familiar, as if something deep within me recognized it. As I spoke, the glowing water rose from the bowl, forming a spinning column in the air before us. "It's working," Matthias whispered. The final words of the incantation escaped my lips, and the column of water suddenly exploded outward in a silent wave of blue light that passed through us and dissipated into the night. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a strange sensation washed over me, a pulling, as if something had hooked itself behind my navel and was gently but insistently tugging. I gasped, doubling over. "What's happening?" I managed to ask. Matthias steadied me, concern evident in his pale eyes. "The ritual creates a tether, a connection that helps reinforce the binding. You should feel it fading soon." He was right. The sensation gradually diminished, though it didn't disappear completely. A faint awareness lingered, like knowing someone was standing behind me without seeing them. "Did it work?" I asked, straightening up. "I think so," Matthias said, gathering the ritual items. "We'll know better tomorrow. If the anomalies have stopped spreading, then the binding is holding." We returned to Olivia's room to find her sleeping peacefully. No sign of Eleanor's presence, no disturbing sleep-talking. That, at least, seemed promising. I settled into the chair beside her bed while Matthias took up position near the door, keeping watch. Despite my exhaustion, sleep eluded me. The faint tugging sensation from the ritual persisted, a constant reminder of my new connection to something I barely understood. When morning came, Olivia woke looking more like herself than she had since the fire tower collapsed. "It worked," she said immediately, her eyes clear and focused. "I can feel it. The hollow's pull has weakened." "The news seems to confirm it," Matthias added, looking up from his phone. "No new disappearances reported overnight. The strange animal behavior has stopped." Relief washed over me. "So, we have time." "Some," Olivia cautioned. "This binding won't hold indefinitely. Weeks at most, maybe only days." The doctor arrived shortly after, pleased with Olivia's progress. "The swelling has gone down faster than expected," he noted, examining her leg. "You're healing remarkably well." If only he knew how remarkable. I caught Olivia's eye, understanding passing between us. Her supernatural healing abilities were accelerating her recovery, which meant we might have less time than anticipated before she was drawn back to the hollow. "When can she be discharged?" I asked. "I'd like to keep her one more night for observation," the doctor replied. "But barring any complications, tomorrow morning seems reasonable." After he left, we began planning in earnest. Matthias spread a detailed map of the Monongahela National Forest across Olivia's bed. "The anchor," he said, tapping a specific area of the map. "If it exists, it would be somewhere in the original settlement, the oldest part of Hollow Pines." Olivia studied the map, her brow furrowed in concentration. "There," she said finally, pointing to a spot near where we'd seen the abandoned general store. "The original Pines homestead, built in 1837. Her finger traced a path. "And here, the family cemetery." "You remember these places?" I asked. She nodded slowly. More clearly now. It's like a fog lifting from parts of my mind I didn't know existed. "The cemetery would be a logical place to hide something important," Matthias mused. "Some place people rarely disturb, with natural protection through superstition." "We'll need to be prepared," I said, thinking of the dangers we'd already faced. "Better equipped than before." Matthias nodded grimly. "I have supplies in my truck, weapons that might work against the Hollow's manifestations. Research suggests iron and silver have some effect." "How soon can you walk?" I asked Olivia. She flexed her injured leg experimentally. "With crutches? Tomorrow, maybe the day after for short distances." She looked between us, her expression serious. "But we shouldn't wait. The binding ritual bought us time, but it's already fading. I can feel it." "I'll go," Matthias volunteered. "Scout the area, try to locate the anchor." "No," Olivia and I said simultaneously. "Too dangerous alone," I explained. "We go together, or not at all." Matthias reluctantly agreed. The next 2 days passed in careful preparation. Olivia was discharged as expected, and we moved to a small rental cabin on the outskirts of Petersburg, close enough to reach medical help if needed, but private enough for our unusual planning sessions. Olivia's recovery continued to astonish me. By the third day, she was walking with just a cane, the surgical incisions already faded to pink lines. Her mind seemed sharper too, memories of Eleanor's life surfacing with increasing clarity. "The anchor," she said on the evening of the third day, looking up from Matthias's journal where she'd been making notes. "I think I know what it is." We gathered around her immediately. "Eleanor's mother, my grandmother, had a locket," she explained. "Silver with unusual engravings. I remember being told never to touch it, that it contained power." She frowned, concentrating. "After she died, it was buried with her in the family cemetery." "A personal item of significance to the original guardian," Matthias said, excitement in his voice. "It fits the description perfectly." "So we dig up a grave?" I asked, uncomfortable with the idea. "It may not be necessary," Olivia replied. "The cemetery has a mausoleum at its center, the family crypt. That's where she would be." We spent the remainder of the evening finalizing our plan. We would enter the forest at dawn, approach Hollow Pines from the east, opposite from our previous route, and make directly for the cemetery. With luck, we could retrieve the locket and be out before Eleanor or her followers realized we were there. That night, I dreamed of the Hollow. I wandered through Hollow Pines, the buildings shifting and changing around me. The general store became a church, became a schoolhouse. People moved through the streets, normal at first glance, but wrong somehow. Their movements too smooth, their faces blank until they turned toward me. Then they had Eleanor's face, all of them, watching me with ancient eyes. I woke gasping, the sheets soaked with sweat. The tugging sensation behind my navel had intensified, a constant pull toward the west, toward the Hollow. The temporary binding wasn't just fading, it was transforming, becoming a tether drawing me back. Dawn found us loaded in Matthias's truck heading toward the forest's eastern boundary. He'd outfitted us with hiking gear, weapons, silver-tipped knives, iron crowbars, and communication devices, though he warned they might not work within Hollow Pines itself. "The Hollow distorts electronics," he explained. "Batteries drain, signals scatter, stay within visual range of each other at all times." We parked where an old logging road ended at the forest's edge. The day was clear but cold, our breath visible in the early morning air. A heavy silence hung over the trees, unbroken by birdsong or the rustle of wildlife. "They know we're coming," Olivia said quietly, staring into the forest. "The Hollow. Eleanor. They're waiting." Despite the chill, I felt sweat break out across my back. "Can we still do this?" She nodded, determination hardening her features. "We have to. The binding is failing faster than I expected. By tomorrow, it might be too late." I could feel it too. The pull was stronger now, insistent. And something else, a whisper at the back of my mind, barely audible but definitely there. Words I couldn't quite make out, spoken in a voice that wasn't mine. We entered the forest in formation, Matthias in front, Olivia in the middle, me bringing up the rear. The trees closed around us like a living entity, branches reaching overhead to block the strengthening daylight. Within minutes, the forest had swallowed the sound of our footsteps, creating an unnerving bubble of silence around us. Matthias navigated by compass, though he checked it obsessively, as if not trusting its readings. "The Hollow interferes with direction," he explained. "It tries to lead you astray." After an hour of hiking, the trees began to thin, giving way to a landscape I didn't recognize from our previous encounter with Hollow Pines. Here, the forest had been cleared long ago, replaced by overgrown fields dotted with the crumbling remains of stone foundations. The original settlement, older and more decayed than the buildings we'd seen before. "We're approaching from a different era," Olivia murmured as if reading my thoughts. The hollow exists in multiple times simultaneously. What we see depends on how we enter. The concept made my head hurt, but I nodded as if I understood. We continued forward, picking our way through the ruins of what had once been homes and businesses. Matthias consulted his map frequently, adjusting our course as needed. "The cemetery should be just beyond that rise," he said finally, pointing to a small hill ahead. As we crested the hill, the cemetery came into view, a half-acre of land surrounded by a rusted wrought-iron fence. Weathered gravestones tilted at odd angles, many so old their inscriptions had worn away completely. At the center, just as Olivia had described, stood a small stone mausoleum, its entrance secured by an iron gate. "There it is," Olivia breathed, her pace quickening despite her injured leg. We approached the cemetery gate cautiously. The iron hinges protested as Matthias pushed it open, the sound unnaturally loud in the silence. I glanced around nervously, half expecting Eleanor or her followers to materialize at the disturbance, but nothing moved among the gravestones or in the ruins beyond. The mausoleum was built of gray stone, green with moss in places. Above the entrance, a name had been carved: Pines. The iron gate was secured with a heavy padlock, ancient and rusted. "Allow me," Matthias said, producing bolt cutters from his backpack. The padlock surrendered with surprising ease, crumbling at the first application of pressure. Matthias pulled the gate open, revealing a dark interior that smelled of damp stone and old death. "I'll go first," Olivia said, taking a flashlight from Matthias. "I'll know where to look." I followed close behind her, unwilling to let her face whatever waited inside alone. The mausoleum was small but contained several stone crypts arranged along the walls. Brass plaques identified the occupants, generations of the Pines family, dating back to the early 1800s. Olivia moved unerringly to one in the far corner. "Here," she said, her flashlight illuminating the plaque. "Eleanor Margaret Pines, 1794–1867. Guardian of the Hollow. Your grandmother," I whispered. Olivia nodded, her expression unreadable. "Help me move the lid." The stone slab covering the crypt was heavy, but with all three of us pushing, it slid aside with a grating sound. Inside lay the remains of a woman, bones wrapped in the decayed tatters of what had once been fine clothing. Around the skeleton's neck, gleaming as if newly polished, hung a silver locket, exactly as Olivia had described. "That's it," she breathed. "The anchor." She reached for it, but Matthias caught her wrist. "Wait, there may be protections, traps." Olivia shook her head. "Not for me, not for the Guardian's blood." She pulled free of his grip and carefully lifted the locket from the skeleton's neck. The chain came away easily, as if eager to be taken. The moment Olivia held the locket, a change came over her. She straightened, her eyes taking on that ancient, knowing look I'd seen at the stone circle. When she spoke, her voice carried that same archaic cadence. "I remember now," she said. "Everything." "Olivia?" I asked cautiously. She turned to me, a sad smile on her lips. "Yes and no. I am Olivia Bailey, but I am also Eleanor Rose Pines. And now I understand what must be done." "The anchor," Matthias prompted. "How do we use it?" "We return to the stone circle," she replied, "where the binding was first created. The locket contains a piece of the original Guardian's soul, willingly given, not taken. With it, we can create a new binding that doesn't require a living sacrifice." It sounded too easy, which made me suspicious. "What's the catch?" Her smile faded. "The Hollow will fight us. It knows what we intend. And—" She hesitated. "There is a price. There's always a price." "What price?" I demanded. "Balance," she said simply. "To close one door, another must open. Not to the Hollow, but elsewhere. A different kind of doorway." Before I could press for clarification, a sound reached us from outside, that familiar keening wail we'd heard in the forest, now multiple voices joining in chorus. "They've found us," Matthias said grimly, drawing his silver-bladed knife. We hurried to the mausoleum entrance. Outside, the cemetery had changed. The gravestones now glowed with a pale blue luminescence, and the ground between them rippled like water. At the gate stood Eleanor, the elder Eleanor, flanked by her followers. They were more numerous now, dozens of blank-faced figures in various states of solidity. "The locket belongs to the Hollow," Eleanor called, her voice carrying unnaturally across the distance. "Return it, and you may leave unharmed." "She's lying," Olivia Eleanor whispered beside me. "They'll never let us leave." Matthias stepped forward, knife raised. "We need to reach the stone circle. It's about a mile northwest from here. I'll hold them off. You two go." "That's suicide," I objected. He gave me a grim smile. "Maybe, but I've been preparing for this moment for 40 years. I have a few tricks they won't expect." Before I could argue further, he pulled something from his pocket, a small cloth bag that he quickly opened, scattering its contents in a line across the mausoleum threshold. The powder sizzled where it landed, forming a glowing barrier. "Iron filings mixed with salt," he explained. "It won't hold long. Go. Now." Olivia grabbed my hand, pulling me toward the back of the mausoleum. "There's another way out," she said, her voice once again fully Olivia's. "Through here." She pushed against a section of the rear wall which swung inward with surprising ease, revealing a narrow tunnel. Without hesitation, she ducked inside, tugging me after her. "Matthias," I called back. "I'll find you at the circle," he shouted, already engaging the first of Eleanor's followers to breach his barrier. "Go." The tunnel was low and narrow, forcing us to move in a crouch. Unlike the earthen passage we'd escaped through before, this one was lined with stone, clearly built with purpose. Olivia led the way confidently, the locket clutched in one hand, a flashlight in the other. "How did you know about this?" I asked as we hurried along. "Eleanor's memories," she replied. "The original settlement had a network of escape tunnels. Officially, they were for protection against Native American attacks. Really, they were built to evacuate people quickly if the Hollow's influence spread too far." The tunnel branched several times, but Olivia never hesitated, choosing her path with certainty. After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, we emerged into daylight again. In a small clearing I recognized immediately, the stone circle. It looked different in daylight, less mystical, more weathered. The stones were clearly ancient, covered in lichen and moss, their carvings nearly eroded away by centuries of exposure. "We made it," I breathed, relieved. "Not quite," Olivia replied grimly, pointing. On the far side of the clearing, figures were emerging from the trees, more of Eleanor's followers, and these moved with purpose, coordinated in a way they hadn't been before. They spread out, forming a loose ring around the stone circle, blocking all potential escape routes. "We need to get inside the circle," Olivia said, clutching the locket tightly. "The stones will protect us while I prepare the ritual." We sprinted for the gap between two approaching followers, taking them by surprise. One reached for me, fingers elongating unnaturally to grasp at my jacket. I swung the iron crowbar Matthias had given me, connecting solidly with its arm. The limb shattered like glass, the figure retreating with an inhuman shriek. Seconds later, we crossed into the stone circle. Immediately, I felt a change in the air, a heaviness, as if the atmosphere itself had thickened. The followers stopped at the boundary just as they had before, unwilling or unable to cross. "They can't enter, but they can still interfere," Olivia warned, already kneeling at the central stone with the carved symbols. "The ritual requires concentration. If they break that, we fail." I stood guard while she began preparations, removing items from her pack, a small silver bowl, a knife, candles. The locket she placed on the carved stone, where it seemed to sink slightly into the rock, as if finding a space made precisely for it. The followers began to circle, just as they had during our previous encounter. But this time, they moved in perfect synchronization, creating a hypnotic pattern that was difficult not to follow with my eyes. "Don't watch them," Olivia warned, noticing my distraction. "That's how they'll try to break your focus." I tore my gaze away, concentrating instead on her preparations. She had placed candles at specific points around the central stone and was now mixing something in the silver bowl. Herbs from her pack, water, and finally, blood from a cut on her palm. "Is Matthias?" I began, worried about our missing companion. "He'll be here," she assured me. "The Hollow can delay him, but it can't prevent his arrival. He has his own connection to this place through his sister." As if summoned by her words, a disturbance erupted at the edge of the clearing. Matthias burst from the trees, bleeding from several wounds but very much alive. He fought his way through the ring of followers, using his silver knife with deadly precision. Each strike caused a follower to dissolve, their form dissipating like smoke. "Matthias!" I called, relief flooding through me. He looked up, spotted us in the circle, and redoubled his efforts to break through. The followers converged on him, recognizing the threat he posed, but his decades of preparation were evident in how he moved, each strike deliberate, each defense anticipating their attacks. With a final lunge, he crossed into the stone circle, collapsing to his knees, breathing heavily. "Just in time," he gasped, blood seeping from a gash on his forehead. I helped him to a sitting position, checking his wounds. None appeared life-threatening, though several would need stitches later. "They're stronger," he said, nodding toward the followers resuming their circling pattern. "More coordinated. The Hollow is exerting direct control now." "All the more reason to finish this quickly," Olivia said, not looking up from her work. "The ritual is almost ready." Outside the circle, a new disturbance rippled through the ranks of followers. They parted, creating a path for a familiar figure, the elder Eleanor, moving with that unnatural gliding motion toward the stone circle. She stopped at the boundary, her ancient eyes fixed on Olivia. "Daughter," she called, her voice carrying that same eerie quality it had in the hospital. "This is not the way." Olivia paused in her preparations, looking up. For a moment, I feared she would respond to that compelling voice. Instead, she smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "Mother," she said, her own voice carrying that archaic cadence again. "You are not my mother. You are what's left of her. A fragment, a shell. The Hollow has consumed the rest." The elder Eleanor's face contorted with rage. "You know nothing. I have protected this place for centuries." "No," Olivia replied calmly. "You have fed it, sustained it, given it piece after piece of your soul until almost nothing human remains." She held up the locket. "But this contains what you once were, the true guardian, before the Hollow corrupted you." A flash of fear crossed the elder Eleanor's face, the first genuine emotion I'd seen there. "The locket is mine," she snarled, pressing against the invisible barrier of the stone circle. The air rippled where she touched it, like heat waves rising from hot pavement. "The ritual," Matthias urged, his eyes on the barrier. "She's weakening the protection. We don't have much time." Olivia nodded, returning her attention to the central stone. She began to speak in that ancient language, her voice rising and falling in a precise cadence. The locket began to glow with the same blue luminescence we'd seen in the cemetery, pulsing in rhythm with her words. Outside the circle, the elder Eleanor was changing, her form growing less solid, more fluid, as if whatever had been holding her together was unraveling. The followers nearest to her began to change as well, their features melting, running together like wax figures left in the sun. "What's happening to them?" I whispered to Matthias. "The Hollow is losing control," he replied, watching with grim satisfaction. "Without Eleanor to channel its power, the constructs are breaking down." Olivia's chanting grew more intense. She added items to the silver bowl. Herbs, a strand of her own hair, finally a drop of blood from her still-bleeding palm. With each addition, the locket's glow intensified. The elder Eleanor shrieked, a sound of pure fury and fear. She hurled herself against the barrier with renewed force. This time the air didn't just ripple, it cracked like glass under too much pressure. "She's breaking through," I warned, grabbing my crowbar. Matthias positioned himself between Olivia and the weakening barrier, knife raised. "Keep going," he called to her. "We'll hold them off." Olivia didn't respond, lost in the rhythm of the ritual. The locket now hovered slightly above the stone, spinning slowly, its glow so intense it was painful to look at directly. With a sound like shattering glass, the barrier broke. The elder Eleanor surged forward, her form now barely human, a writhing mass of darkness with only the suggestion of a face. Behind her, the followers poured through the gap, flowing like a tide toward us. Matthias met the first wave with his silver knife, each strike causing a follower to dissolve into mist. I swung my crowbar at anything that got past him, the iron causing similar dissolving effects where it connected. But there were too many. They flowed around us, converging on Olivia from all sides. I fought desperately to reach her, watching in horror as the elder Eleanor loomed over her, darkness spreading like wings. "Olivia!" I screamed. What happened next occurred so quickly I could barely process it. Olivia looked up, meeting the elder Eleanor's gaze without fear. She spoke a final word, sharp, commanding, and plunged her bleeding hand directly into the spinning locket. Light exploded outward, blinding in its intensity. I fell to my knees, shielding my eyes, feeling a wave of force pass through me like a physical blow. The tugging sensation I'd felt since the binding ritual suddenly intensified 100-fold, then snapped, like a tether being cut. When my vision cleared, the clearing had changed. The followers were gone. The elder Eleanor was gone. In the center of the stone circle, Olivia knelt alone, her hand still outstretched but empty, the locket nowhere to be seen. "Olivia!" I called, scrambling to her side. She turned to me, and I saw immediately that something was different. Her eyes held a depth I'd never seen before, neither fully Olivia nor fully Eleanor, but something new, a synthesis. "It's done," she said simply. "The threshold is sealed." Matthias joined us, bleeding from fresh wounds but alive. "Permanently?" She nodded. The locket contained the essence of the original guardian, the first Eleanor Pines. She willingly bound herself to the hollow centuries ago, creating the first seal. Over time, that binding corrupted, twisted. The hollow found ways to feed through it. She looked down at her empty hand. "I've renewed the original binding, using her willing sacrifice rather than my own." "And the price?" I asked, remembering her cryptic words in the mausoleum. "You said there would be a price." A shadow crossed her face. "Balance. To close one door, another opens. Not to the hollow, but elsewhere." "What does that mean?" I pressed. She gestured to the forest around us. "This place is changed now. The hollow's influence is gone, but something remains. A thinness between worlds. Not dangerous, but different. People who come here may experience things. Glimpses of other times, other possibilities, dreams that feel more real than waking." "A haunting?" Matthias suggested. "More like an echo," she corrected. "Harmless, but permanent. The forest will always be strange now, but in a way that inspires wonder rather than fear." It seemed a small price to pay for sealing the threshold permanently. I helped Olivia to her feet, noticing that she no longer favored her injured leg. In fact, all signs of the surgery were gone. The skin smooth and unblemished where incisions had been. "Are you—" I hesitated, not sure how to phrase the question. "Which one are you now, Olivia or Eleanor?" She smiled, squeezing my hand. "Both. Neither. The memories are integrated now. Two lives that were always connected, finally reconciled." She looked around the stone circle one last time. "I'm still your friend, Emily." That hasn't changed, but I understand things now that I didn't before. We made our way out of the clearing, following a path that seemed to emerge naturally before us, leading toward the edge of the forest. The trees around us looked different, more vibrant somehow, the colors deeper, the shapes more defined. Occasionally, I caught glimpses of movement at the corner of my vision, figures that vanished when I turned to look directly at them. The echo, Olivia explained, noticing my reaction. Fragments of memory and possibility, bleeding through from elsewhere. They can't harm you. Matthias walked ahead of us, consulting his compass out of habit, though the path was clear. "My sister," he said suddenly, stopping in his tracks. "I saw her." Olivia nodded, unsurprised. The echo shows what has meaning to each observer. For you, it's Charlotte. For me, it might be aspects of my past lives. For Emily, she glanced at me curiously. I had seen nothing specific yet, just vague movements and shapes. "Maybe I'm not attuned to it," I suggested. "Or maybe what matters most to you is right here," she replied with a small smile. "Not lost or missing." We reached the edge of the forest by mid-afternoon, emerging near where we'd parked Matthias's truck. The world beyond the trees looked almost jarringly normal. Cars passing on a distant highway, the sun shining on ordinary fields. "What now?" I asked as we loaded our gear into the truck. "For me, a new chapter," Olivia said. "I have 2 lifetimes of memories to sort through, to integrate. That will take time." "And the hollow?" Matthias asked. "Should we monitor it, just to be sure?" She considered this. "The binding is permanent, but yes, it would be wise to check periodically, not out of fear, but respect." As we drove away from the forest, I kept glancing back, half expecting to see the elder Eleanor or her followers emerging from the trees. But the forest remained still, peaceful in the afternoon light. Olivia caught me looking. "It's really over," she assured me. "The hollow is sealed. Eleanor, the corrupted version, is gone." "But the forest is still different," I said. "Yes, it always will be." She turned to watch the landscape passing outside her window. Some places are thin, not in a dangerous way, but in a way that lets us glimpse what might be, what could be. The Monongahela has always been such a place, even before the hollow. Now, it's just more honest about it. We returned to the rental cabin to collect our belongings, planning to leave Petersburg the next morning. Matthias decided to stay in the area, feeling a connection to the place he couldn't quite explain. Perhaps it was the glimpse he'd had of his sister, or perhaps something deeper, a purpose fulfilled but not quite completed. That night, I dreamed again of the forest, but differently. I walked peaceful paths dappled with sunlight. Occasionally, figures appeared among the trees, not threatening, but curious, watching. Some wore clothing from centuries past. Others seemed almost translucent, like ideas of people rather than people themselves. In a small clearing, I came upon Olivia. Or was it Eleanor? She stood by a stream, skipping stones across the surface. When she turned to me, her face kept shifting subtly, sometimes more Olivia, sometimes more Eleanor, never settling completely on either. "The hollow is dreaming now," she said, her voice echoing strangely. "Dreaming of what it cannot have." I woke with the morning sun streaming through the cabin window, the dream still vivid in my mind. Olivia was already up, sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the distant line of the forest on the horizon. "I dreamed of you," I said, joining her. "I know," she replied simply. "I was there." I didn't ask what she meant. Some things were better left mysterious, I decided. Some doors, once opened, changed you in ways you couldn't entirely understand. We left Petersburg that morning, driving east toward our respective homes. Matthias saw us off, promising to stay in touch. I believed he would. Our shared experience had forged a bond that distance couldn't easily break. As we crossed the state line, leaving West Virginia behind, I glanced at Olivia. "Are you really okay? With everything that happened, everything you remembered?" She considered the question carefully. "I'm different," she said finally, "but not in a way that diminishes who I was as Olivia. If anything, I'm more complete now, like finding pieces of myself I didn't know were missing. And the pull, the connection to the hollow?" She shook her head. "Gone. The binding is different now, self-sustaining through the locket. I'm free." It was all I needed to hear. Whatever had happened in those woods, whatever impossible things we'd witnessed, Olivia had emerged whole. Changed, certainly, but whole. As for me, the experience had altered my perception in ways I was still discovering. Sometimes, in quiet moments, I'd catch glimpses of movement at the edges of my vision. Echoes, perhaps, of the forest's new nature that had followed me home. Not frightening, but a reminder that reality was more permeable than I'd once believed. I still wake up sometimes in the night, heart racing from dreams of the hollow. But they're different dreams now. Not nightmares of being hunted, but visions of walking between worlds, of doors closing and opening, of connections forming across impossible distances. My name is Emily Hall, and I am 32 years old. This happened in the Monongahela National Forest in West Virginia, just 3 months ago. I still wake up in the night, not screaming anymore, but wondering what lies beyond the thin places in the world, wondering what dreams when we dream, wondering what watches from the corners of our vision when we're brave enough to look. My name is Laura Adams, and I am 32 years old. This happened in Canaan Valley, West Virginia, just 3 months ago, though it feels like both yesterday and a lifetime away. I'd been planning the backpacking trip for months, a solo adventure through the Monongahela National Forest. After my divorce from Greg last winter, I needed something to prove I could stand on my own, that I wasn't the fragile, dependent woman he'd always made me out to be. My therapist thought the trip was premature, but I was tired of being told what I was ready for. The plan was simple: a 5-day loop starting from Blackwater Falls State Park, following old logging roads and eventually connecting to the Dolly Sods Wilderness. I'd hiked parts of it before, but never alone, and never for so long. The forecast predicted clear autumn days with temperatures dropping into the low 40s at night. Perfect hiking weather. I arrived at the trailhead on a Tuesday morning in early October. The parking lot was nearly empty, just 2 other cars, a relief, as I wanted solitude but not complete isolation. The forest welcomed me with a symphony of rustling leaves in crimson and gold. The earthy scent of decaying foliage filled my lungs as I shouldered my pack, checked my trekking poles, and set off. The first day went exactly as planned. I covered 12 miles, my boots crunching over fallen leaves and exposed roots. The trail followed Blackwater River for most of the afternoon, its dark waters rushing over moss-covered rocks. I'd read that the river got its name from the tannins leached from hemlock and red spruce needles, turning the water the color of strong tea. But to me, it looked like flowing ink, absorbing light rather than reflecting it. I made camp near a small tributary, pitching my tent on a flat area about 50 yards from the water. As I filtered water for dinner, I noticed strange markings carved into a nearby sycamore, crude symbols that didn't look like standard trailblazes. I assumed they were the work of previous hikers or maybe local kids and thought nothing more of it. The first night passed peacefully, though I woke once thinking I heard my name being called, a woman's voice carried on the wind. Half asleep, I dismissed it as a dream and drifted back to unconsciousness. The second day began with a steady climb away from the river valley. The trail narrowed as it switchbacked up the ridge, sometimes disappearing altogether beneath carpets of fallen leaves. Twice I had to backtrack after losing the path, consulting my map and GPS to reorient myself. By midday, I reached a stunning overlook, Lindy Point, according to my map, where the land fell away to reveal the vast canyon carved by the Blackwater River hundreds of feet below. As I ate my lunch of trail mix and jerky, a movement in the forest below caught my eye. Something large and dark shifted between the trees, moving in a way that seemed neither human nor like any animal I recognized. When I blinked, it was gone. I told myself it was just a black bear, common in these parts, though the movement hadn't seemed right for that either. That afternoon, the hiking became more difficult. The trail grew steeper, more technical, requiring careful footing over loose shale and between jutting rocks. The forest changed too. Denser, darker, the trees growing closer together with branches that seemed to reach for me as I passed. I found myself checking my GPS more frequently, uncomfortable with how the landscape seemed to shift around me. I made camp earlier than planned that evening, my legs aching from the difficult terrain. I chose a small clearing near an unnamed creek that trickled over a bed of smooth stones. As I gathered wood for a fire, I discovered another tree with strange markings, this time more elaborate, a spiral pattern with lines radiating outward like a distorted sun. In the center was what looked like a crude eye. The wind picked up as darkness fell, whistling through the trees with an almost vocal quality. I built my fire larger than necessary, finding comfort in its warm light as the forest around me disappeared into blackness. That night, I dreamed of roots growing up through the floor of my tent, wrapping around my ankles and slowly pulling me into the earth. I woke with the dawn, damp with dew and sweat. My fire had died to cold ashes, though I was certain I'd banked it properly before sleep. My water bottle, which I always kept inside my tent, was sitting outside on a nearby rock. I told myself I must have left it there in my fatigue, but a tiny voice in the back of my mind whispered that I hadn't. The third day brought fog, thick, disorienting fog that reduced visibility to mere yards. It clung to the trees and muffled sound, transforming the familiar forest into an alien landscape. My GPS still worked, but I didn't trust it entirely. The trail it showed often didn't match what lay before me. Several times I had to make detours around fallen trees or washed-out sections of path that weren't marked on my map. By midday, the fog had grown so dense that I seriously considered making camp and waiting for it to clear. But something urged me forward. A need to reach my planned destination, a primitive campsite near a feature called Bald Knob. My planned route would take me through a section of old-growth forest that had somehow escaped the widespread logging of the late 1800s. As I walked, I began to notice things left along the trail. Small arrangements of stones in precise patterns, bundles of twigs bound with what looked like human hair, tiny effigies made of bone and feather hanging from low branches. Art projects from other campers, I told myself, though they grew more elaborate and unsettling the further I hiked. The fog began to thin in the late afternoon, revealing that I'd wandered into a part of the forest I didn't recognize at all. The trees here were ancient, massive trunks wider than my arms could encircle, their upper branches lost in mist. The forest floor was oddly clear of underbrush, covered instead with a carpet of pale fungi that seemed to pulse slightly when viewed from the corner of my eye. My GPS showed no trail here. According to its screen, I was a half-mile south of where I should be, in an area marked simply as undeveloped wilderness. I turned back the way I'd come, intent on retracing my steps, but within minutes found myself in a small clearing I hadn't passed through before. In the center of the clearing stood a crude stone structure, not quite a cabin, more like a shelter built into the side of a small rise in the land. Its walls were made of stacked slate without mortar, its roof a combination of timber and sod. A small spring bubbled up nearby, feeding a crystal-clear pool before disappearing back into the earth. It looked ancient yet somehow maintained. I approached cautiously, calling out a hello in case someone was inside. No answer came. The entrance was low, requiring me to duck my head as I peered into the darkness within. It took a moment for my eyes to adjust, revealing a sparse interior. A stone hearth, a bed frame of lashed branches covered with dried grasses, and shelves cut directly into the rock wall holding clay jars and bundles of dried herbs. The air inside smelled of smoke, earth, and something else, something sharp and animal. Despite the strangeness of the place, it felt safer than spending another night exposed in the increasingly alien forest. Daylight was fading fast, and the thought of navigating the woods in darkness filled me with a primal dread. I decided to camp just outside the shelter, unwilling to claim someone's space but needing the psychological comfort of its presence. I pitched my tent near the spring, built a small fire, and prepared my dinner while watching the shadows lengthen among the ancient trees. That night, I dreamed of a woman. She stood at the edge of my camp, just beyond the firelight, tall and gaunt with long gray hair that moved in ways that didn't match the breeze. Her eyes reflected the firelight like an animal's, and her fingers ended in nails that curved like talons. In the dream, she spoke to me without moving her lips, her voice somehow inside my head. "You're on borrowed ground, Laura Adams," she said, my name sounding wrong in her mouth as if she were trying on ill-fitting clothes. "You walked past the warnings. Now you're mine to keep or discard." I woke, gasping, my tent illuminated by moonlight bright enough to cast shadows. Outside, something moved, a shuffling sound, then a soft scraping against the nylon of my tent. I froze, heart hammering against my ribs as a silhouette passed across the tent wall, hunched and misshapen, larger than a person should be. "Who's there?" I called, my voice embarrassingly thin with fear. The movement stopped. Then, slowly, the zipper of my tent began to rise, though I hadn't touched it. Inch by inch, the entrance opened, revealing nothing but the night beyond. No hand pulling the zipper, no figure standing outside, just darkness and the distant chorus of frogs from the spring. I scrambled for my headlamp, clicking it on and shining it into the night. The beam caught nothing but trees and mist. My fire had died completely. Not even embers remaining, though I'd built it to last hours yet. The spring, which had been a gentle trickle when I'd fallen asleep, now gurgled and splashed with greater force, as if swollen by unseen rain. Sleep was impossible after that. I sat up until dawn, knife in one hand, headlamp in the other, straining to identify the source of every crack and rustle from the surrounding woods. When morning finally came, I packed quickly, eager to leave the strange clearing and its stone shelter behind. But as I shouldered my pack and consulted my GPS for the quickest route back to a marked trail, I discovered my device was dead, its battery completely drained despite having been nearly full the night before. My phone, too, showed no charge, though I'd barely used it. Even my portable battery pack, which should have held enough power for a week, was inexplicably empty. Panic fluttered in my chest, but I forced it down. I still had my paper map and compass. I'd find my way out using those, just as hikers had done for generations before electronics. I oriented myself as best I could, identifying what I thought was north based on the morning sun, and set off in what should have been the direction of the main trail. I walked for hours, the forest growing denser and stranger with each mile. The trees seemed to press closer together, their trunks twisted into impossible shapes, branches intertwining overhead to block out more and more of the sky. The ground became boggy in places, forcing me to detour around stagnant pools of black water that reflected nothing, not even the sky above. By midday, I knew I was hopelessly lost. Nothing on my map corresponded to what I was seeing, and my compass needle spun erratically, as if confused by some magnetic anomaly. The fog returned, creeping in from all sides until I could barely see 20 feet ahead. I was contemplating climbing a tree to get my bearings when I heard it. A voice calling my name. A woman's voice, raspy and thin, like dry leaves scraping against stone. Laura. Laura Adams. I spun around, searching for the source, but saw only mist and trees. "Who's there?" I called, gripping my trekking poles tighter, ready to use them as weapons if needed. "Lost little Laura." The voice came again, closer now, seeming to come from just behind my left ear. I whirled, but again found nothing. "You walked past the warnings," The voice continued, now seeming to come from multiple directions at once. "The marks were clear. This ground is not for your kind." A figure appeared in the mist ahead, the woman from my dream, impossibly tall and thin, her gray hair floating around her head as if underwater. Her skin was pale as birch bark, stretched too tight over sharp bones, and her eyes were black pools with no whites visible. I'm sorry," I stammered, backing away slowly. "I didn't know. I'm just trying to get back to the trail." She tilted her head at an impossible angle, regarding me with those bottomless eyes. "There is no trail anymore. Not for you." "Please," I said, ashamed of the quaver in my voice. "I just want to leave. I won't come back." "Everyone says that," she replied, taking a step closer. Her movements were wrong, too fluid, as if her joints didn't work the way human joints should. "Then they come again, with their machines and their noise and their greed." I realized with dawning horror that she didn't see me as an individual. I represented something else to her, something hated. "I'm not a logger or a miner," I said quickly. "I'm just a hiker. I respect the forest." She made a sound then, something between a laugh and the cry of a hunting owl. "Respect? You humans know nothing of respect. You take and give nothing back." Before I could respond, she was suddenly beside me, moving faster than my eyes could track. Up close, I could see that what I'd taken for clothing was actually part of her, bark-like skin forming patterns that mimicked fabric. She smelled of loam and fungus and something metallic, like blood. Her hand, if you could call it that, shot out and gripped my wrist. Her fingers were too long, the joints too numerous, and they wrapped completely around my arm like pale roots. Her touch was ice-cold and sent a shock of pain up to my shoulder. "Your life force will feed the old ones," she hissed, her face inches from mine. I could see now that her teeth were small and pointed, too many of them crowded in her mouth. "Your body will nourish the soil, a fair exchange for your trespass." Terror gave me strength. I yanked my arm free with a scream and swung one of my trekking poles at her head. It connected with a sound like a branch breaking, and she staggered back, a look of surprise crossing her inhuman features. Black fluid oozed from a gash on her cheek, thick as sap. I ran. I abandoned all thought of direction or navigation and simply fled, crashing through underbrush, leaping over fallen logs, splashing through shallow streams. Behind me came sounds of pursuit. Not footsteps, but a rushing noise like wind through trees, punctuated by that same owl-like cry, now tinged with rage. The fog seemed to part before me as I ran, revealing a path I hadn't seen before. I followed it blindly, my lungs burning, legs pumping. The trees thinned slightly, allowing shafts of late-afternoon sunlight to break through, guiding my way. I don't know how long I ran. Time seemed to stretch and compress in that strange forest. But eventually, I burst from the trees onto what was unmistakably a human trail. Wide, well-maintained, with fresh boot prints visible in the soft earth. I collapsed to my knees, gulping air, waiting for the creature to emerge from the woods behind me. But nothing came. When I finally mustered the courage to look back, I saw only normal forest. No fog, no twisted trees, no sign of the pale woman. My relief was short-lived. As darkness approached, I realized I still had no idea where I was on the trail network or how to get back to my car. Without GPS or phone, I was still very much lost, if not quite as hopelessly as before. I decided to follow the trail downhill, reasoning that it would eventually lead to a road or settlement. I walked until the light failed completely, then made a hasty camp just off the trail. I couldn't bring myself to start a fire, fearing it might attract the creature's attention again. Instead, I ate cold protein bars in my tent, jumping at every sound from the surrounding woods. That night, exhaustion overcame fear, and I fell into a deep sleep free of dreams. I woke to birdsong and sunlight filtering through the trees. Normal, benign forest stretching in all directions. For a moment, I wondered if the previous day's events had been some kind of hallucination brought on by exhaustion or contaminated water. But the black bruise encircling my wrist where the creature had grabbed me proved otherwise. The mark was perfect. 5 elongated fingerprints connected to a palm, the whole thing already turning a sickly yellow-green at the edges. I packed quickly and continued downhill, moving as fast as I safely could on the increasingly steep trail. By mid-morning, I heard the most beautiful sound imaginable, the distant rumble of vehicles on pavement. A road. An hour later, I emerged from the forest onto the shoulder of Route 32, about 5 miles south of where I'd left my car. A kind local couple gave me a ride back to the Blackwater Falls parking lot, concerned by my disheveled appearance and the wild look in my eyes. I thanked them with forced cheerfulness, trying to seem like a normal hiker who'd simply gotten turned around, not someone who'd encountered something impossible in the ancient woods. My car was where I'd left it, though now it was the only vehicle in the lot. I threw my pack in the trunk and drove straight home, a 6-hour journey I barely remember. I was running a fever by the time I arrived, and the bruise on my arm had spread, black tendrils extending toward my elbow and hand. The doctors at the emergency room diagnosed a severe allergic reaction to some unknown toxin, probably a plant or insect, they said. The treatment worked, slowly reducing the swelling and discoloration, though a perfect handprint remains visible even now, months later, like a tattoo just under my skin. I've told no one the full story until now. Who would believe me? Sometimes I don't believe it myself. But at night, when the wind blows through the trees outside my apartment, I swear I can hear that voice again, raspy and ancient, calling my name with a promise or a threat. And sometimes, in my bathroom mirror, I catch a glimpse of something changing in my reflection. My eyes a shade darker, my movements a touch too fluid, my fingers perhaps a bit longer than they should be. The doctors say the toxin is gone from my system. I'm not so sure. The forest took something from me that day, but I fear it gave me something in return. Something that grows stronger as the bruise fades, something that pulls me toward the woods even as my mind recoils in terror. I've been researching the area since my return, looking for any history that might explain what I encountered. There are old stories, very old, about the original inhabitants of the region believing certain valleys were sacred ground, places where the barrier between worlds grew thin, places where things could cross over. More disturbingly, I found accounts from early European settlers describing encounters with tree women, or hollow ladies, in the deepest parts of the forest, tall, pale figures who lured trespassers to their deaths. Most historians dismiss these as superstition or cautionary tales meant to keep people from wandering too far into dangerous wilderness. I know better now. Whatever she was, spirit, monster, or something human language has no name for, she let me go that day. I don't think she'll be so merciful if I return. And yet, the pull grows stronger. Last week, I caught myself researching trails in Monongahela National Forest, my fingers moving across the keyboard as if controlled by someone else. I threw away my hiking gear. I changed jobs to remove the temptation of vacation time. I even considered moving across the country, but deep down, I know these are temporary measures. She's waiting for me in those ancient woods. And someday, when the pull becomes too strong to resist, I'll return to that forgotten valley with its stone shelter and clear spring. I'll walk past the warnings again, this time with open eyes. And when I do, I don't think I'll be coming back. My name is Jacob Carter, and I am 32 years old. This happened in the Monongahela National Forest in West Virginia about 2 years ago. I've always been an avid hiker, but after my divorce I decided I needed something more. A longer journey to clear my head and reset. That's how I found myself planning a week-long solo backpacking trip through some of the most remote sections of the Monongahela. My therapist thought it was a good idea, a way to process everything, but suggested I not go completely alone. That's when I decided to adopt Rex, a 3-year-old German Shepherd mix from the local shelter. He needed a second chance, and so did I. Rex and I spent 3 months training together before our trip. Weekend hikes, camping in the backyard, and gradually longer excursions. He took to the outdoors naturally, and I felt confident we were ready for something more challenging. I mapped out a route that would take us through Seneca Creek backcountry, past Spruce Knob, and eventually to the remote areas near Dolly Sods. It was ambitious, but doable, especially in late September when the weather would be mild and the fall colors beginning to emerge. The first 2 days were everything I'd hoped for. The forest was awash in autumn hues, the trails challenging but manageable. Rex stayed close, occasionally darting ahead to investigate a scent before returning to my side. We made good time, and I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders with each mile we covered. On the 3rd day, things began to change. It started with the weather. The clear skies gave way to a low-hanging mist that seemed to seep up from the ground rather than descend from above. The temperature dropped, and the forest took on a different character. The vibrant colors dulled, and sounds became muffled in the dense fog. "What do you think, buddy? Should we press on or make camp early?" I asked Rex, who had grown unusually quiet. He stayed closer to me now, no longer exploring ahead. His ears were alert, head swiveling to track sounds I couldn't hear. I decided to continue a few more miles to reach our planned campsite near a small mountain stream. The fog made navigation challenging, but I had a good topographical map and compass. GPS service was spotty in these parts as expected, but I'd prepared for that. By late afternoon we reached what seemed to be our intended camping area, though the fog made it difficult to be certain. Rex paced nervously as I set up camp, his nails clicking against the rocky ground. "It's okay, boy, just some fog," I reassured him, but his behavior was making me uneasy. I'd never seen him this agitated, not even during thunderstorms back home. I got a small fire going, which seemed to help Rex relax. We ate dinner, dehydrated beef stew for me, premium dog food for him, and I settled in with my journal to record the day's hike. The fog had grown thicker, forming a wall around our small clearing. The fire's light didn't penetrate more than a few feet into the milky white darkness. That's when I first heard it. A voice, distant but clear, calling what sounded like a name. "Hello," I called back, standing up. "Is someone there?" No response, just the soft crackling of my fire. Rex was on his feet now, hackles raised, staring intently into the fog. "Did you hear that, boy?" I whispered, straining to listen. 5 minutes passed in silence. I was beginning to think I'd imagined it when the voice came again, closer this time. It was a woman's voice, soft and melodic, calling what sounded like Thomas. Rex growled low in his throat. "Hello," I called again, louder this time. "Do you need help?" I grabbed my headlamp and was about to venture into the fog when Rex planted himself in front of me, blocking my path. His growl deepened and he showed his teeth, not at me, but at whatever might be in the fog. "Easy, Rex." I placed a hand on his back, feeling the tension in his muscles. "It's probably just another hiker who's lost." I stayed at the edge of our campsite, calling out periodically, but the voice didn't come again. Eventually, Rex settled down, though he remained vigilant, his eyes fixed on the wall of fog. Sleep came fitfully that night. I kept waking to check on Rex, who had positioned himself between me and the direction the voice had come from. Each time I woke, he was alert, watching. Dawn brought no relief from the fog. If anything, it seemed thicker, almost with a texture to it. I could barely see 20 feet in any direction. My plan had been to reach Spruce Knob by the end of day 4, but in these conditions I wasn't sure it was wise to continue. "What do you think? Rex? Should we stay put until this clears?" Rex's response was to press against my leg, his body still tense. I decided to give it a few hours. If the fog didn't lift by noon, we'd make camp here another night. I used the morning to check our supplies and refill our water containers at the nearby stream. The water ran clear and cold, but as I knelt beside it, I noticed something strange. There were no sounds of insects or birds, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush. The forest was completely silent except for the gentle gurgle of the stream. I returned to camp to find Rex digging frantically at something near the base of a large oak tree. As I approached, he backed away, whining. "What did you find, boy?" In the disturbed earth was a small, tarnished locket. It looked old, the metal corroded with time and exposure. I picked it up, turning it over in my hand. There was an inscription on the back, but it was too worn to read. When I tried to open it, it remained stubbornly closed. "Interesting find, Rex." I pocketed the locket, making a mental note to try cleaning it later to see if I could read the inscription. By noon, the fog had not cleared. If anything, it seemed to be developing strange patterns, swirling in ways that didn't match any natural air currents. I decided to stay put for another night. I had enough supplies, and pushing forward in these conditions seemed foolish. I spent the afternoon gathering more firewood and setting up a more substantial camp. Rex remained unusually vigilant, often standing at attention, staring into the fog, his ears swiveling to track sounds I couldn't hear. As evening approached, the temperature dropped dramatically. I had to add layers, surprised by the sudden cold snap. The fire seemed to struggle against it, the flames burning lower despite my efforts to build it up. That's when the whispering started. It was so faint at first that I thought it was just the wind through the trees. But there was no wind, not even a breeze. The whispers seemed to come from all directions, indistinct but clearly human. Rex pressed against me, trembling now. "It's okay, boy," I said, though I didn't believe it myself. Something was very wrong here. I added more wood to the fire, trying to push back the darkness. The whispers grew louder, more distinct. I could almost make out words now, fragments of conversations, pleas, warnings. Rex began to bark, spinning in circles as if trying to locate the source of the voices. And then, cutting through the whispers, came the woman's voice again, clear as day. "Thomas, please, come back to me." I jumped to my feet, heart pounding. "Who's there?" I shouted. "Show yourself." The whispers ceased abruptly, leaving a silence so profound it felt like pressure against my eardrums. Rex stopped barking and stood perfectly still, staring into the fog about 10 feet from our camp. Slowly, the fog in that spot began to coalesce, thickening and darkening until it formed a vaguely human shape. It wasn't solid. I could still see through it to the trees beyond, but it was definitely the silhouette of a woman in what looked like an old-fashioned dress. My mouth went dry. I'd never believed in ghosts, but I couldn't deny what I was seeing. The figure drifted closer, and I could make out more details. Long hair, a slender build, and what seemed to be a gaping wound where her throat should have been. Rex whimpered but held his ground next to me. The figure stopped at the edge of our campsite, hovering just beyond the firelight. "Who are you?" I managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper. The figure raised an arm pointing directly at the pocket where I'd placed the locket. A sound emerged from it, not from where a mouth would be, but from the wound in its neck, a wet, gurgling attempt at speech. I fumbled in my pocket, retrieving the locket. As soon as it was in my hand, the figure drifted closer. Rex growled, backing up against my legs. "Is this yours?" I asked, holding up the locket. The figure nodded, the movement unnatural and jerky. It reached out, its arm elongating impossibly, fingers stretching toward the locket. I instinctively stepped back and the figure stopped, its form rippling with what seemed like frustration or anger. The gurgling sounds came again, more insistent. I couldn't understand the words, but the intent was clear. It wanted the locket. "I'll leave it here," I said, placing the locket on a flat rock near the fire. "Take it and go." The figure drifted to the rock but made no move to take the locket. Instead, it looked at me, then at the locket, then back at me. It raised its arm again, this time pointing deeper into the forest. It wanted me to go somewhere with the locket. "No way," I said, shaking my head. "I'm not following you anywhere." The figure's form darkened, the fog swirling more violently. The whispers returned, louder now, angry and insistent. Rex barked furiously, and I felt a cold dread washing over me. Okay, I said, picking up the locket again. Show me, but not tonight. In the morning, when I can see where I'm going. The figure seemed to consider this, then nodded again. It drifted back into the fog, slowly dissolving until it was indistinguishable from the mist. The whispers faded, and Rex gradually calmed, though he remained alert. I didn't sleep at all that night. I kept the fire burning as high as I could, and Rex and I sat back to back, watching the fog for any sign of the figure's return. I clutched the locket in my hand, its metal growing warm from my grip. By dawn, I was exhausted but resolute. I needed to understand what was happening. The fog remained thick, but there was enough daylight filtering through to see a bit better. I packed up camp, leaving only what I couldn't carry. "Ready, Rex?" I asked, securing the locket in my pocket. He pressed against my leg, clearly not enthusiastic about our plan, but unwilling to leave my side. As if on cue, the figure reappeared at the edge of our clearing. It was less distinct in the daylight, more of a shimmer in the fog than a solid shape, but still recognizable as the woman from the night before. It drifted away, then turned back, clearly expecting us to follow. Taking a deep breath, I stepped into the fog, Rex at my heel. We followed the figure deeper into the forest, away from any trail I'd seen on my map. The terrain grew increasingly difficult, steep, rocky slopes, dense underbrush, fallen trees blocking our path. Rex stayed close, occasionally whining, but never balking. After what felt like hours, we emerged into a small clearing. In the center stood the remains of what must have been a cabin. Now, only the stone foundation and part of a chimney remained, overtaken by vegetation. The figure drifted to the chimney and hovered there. I approached cautiously, Rex pressing against my leg. As I got closer, I noticed something embedded in the mortar between the stones, a small metal box about the size of a deck of cards. The figure pointed insistently at the box. I reached out and tugged, but it was firmly set in the mortar. I took out my multi-tool and carefully chipped away at the surrounding mortar until the box came free. It was an old tin, rusted but intact. A small latch held it closed. I looked up at the figure, which nodded encouragingly. I flipped the latch and opened the box. Inside was a folded piece of yellowed paper and what looked like a lock of dark hair tied with a faded ribbon. I carefully unfolded the paper. The handwriting was faded but still legible. My dearest Elizabeth, if you are reading this, then I have failed to return to you. The accusations against you are false. Caldwell knows the truth, but fears what the townspeople will do if they discover his son is the real murderer. I have the evidence to clear your name, but I fear he has sent men to stop me. If I do not return by morning, seek help from Sheriff Morris in Oakland. He is an honest man and will see justice done. I will love you always. Thomas. I looked up at the figure, at Elizabeth, understanding dawning. You were accused of murder, I said softly, and Thomas tried to help you, but he never made it back. The figure nodded, the movement sad and weary. It pointed at the locket in my pocket, then at the tin box. I took out the locket and tried once more to open it. This time, it gave way with a small click. Inside was a tiny portrait of a man with a serious expression and a small mustache. On the other side was a portrait of a young woman, Elizabeth, I presumed, before whatever tragedy had befallen her. What happened to you? I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer from the wound at her throat. The figure's form rippled, and suddenly the clearing around me changed. It was like watching a film overlay reality. I saw the cabin as it must have been, whole, with smoke coming from the chimney. A crowd of men surrounded it, their faces contorted with rage. They dragged a young woman, Elizabeth, from the doorway. Despite her screams and protests, they brought her to a large oak tree at the edge of the clearing. I watched in horror as they put a rope around her neck. One man read from a paper, some kind of makeshift trial verdict, accusing her of murdering 3 children from the nearby town. Elizabeth protested her innocence to the end, begging them to wait for Thomas to return with proof of her innocence. They didn't wait. I turned away as they hoisted her up, unable to watch. But the sounds. God, the sounds will haunt me forever. When I looked back, the vision had faded, and the ghostly figure of Elizabeth hovered near the remains of the tree where she had died, the same oak tree where Rex had found the locket. "I'm so sorry," I said, my voice breaking. "Thomas never made it back with the evidence." The figure pointed at the letter in my hand, then at the locket, then made a sweeping gesture toward the east, toward civilization. "You want me to clear your name," I realized. "After all this time, you want the truth to be known." Elizabeth nodded, her form seeming to grow slightly more solid, more hopeful. I looked at the letter again. Caldwell's son was the real killer, and this Caldwell covered it up. And Thomas had evidence, but he never made it back here. I looked up at Elizabeth. What happened to Thomas, and what evidence did he have? Elizabeth's form shimmered, and another vision overtook the clearing. Thomas, the man from the locket portrait, riding hard through the forest. 3 men intercepting him. A struggle. Thomas falling from his horse, papers scattering from his saddlebag, the men gathering the papers and setting them aflame. Thomas, wounded but alive, being dragged away. When the vision cleared, Elizabeth pointed toward the north, then made a digging motion. "They buried him somewhere north of here?" I guessed. She nodded, then pointed at the box in my hand, at the lock of hair. "This was his hair?" I asked. She nodded again. I sat on a fallen log, trying to process everything. "Elizabeth, this happened a long time ago, didn't it? The people who did this to you, to Thomas, they're long dead." She nodded, but pointed at the letter again, then swept her arm in a circle encompassing the forest around us. "You're still here because the truth was never told," I said, understanding. "You can't rest until your name is cleared." She nodded, a grateful expression crossing her translucent features. I sighed, looking at Rex, who had been watching the exchange with nervous attention. "Well, boy, looks like our hiking trip just got a lot more complicated." I carefully returned the lock of hair and letter to the tin box and secured it in my pack along with the locket. "I'll do what I can, Elizabeth. I promise." The relief in her posture was palpable. She drifted closer, and I felt a cold brush against my cheek, like a kiss of gratitude. Then her form began to disperse, fading into the fog until she was gone. As she disappeared, the fog began to thin as well, sunlight breaking through for the first time in days. Rex shook himself and sneezed, as if throwing off the supernatural atmosphere. I checked my map and compass, getting my bearings. We were far off my planned route, but I could see a way to reach the nearest town, Harmon, by nightfall if we pushed hard. As we hiked, I kept expecting to see Elizabeth again, but she remained absent. The forest returned to normal. Birds sang, insects buzzed, and small animals rustled in the underbrush. It was as if a curse had been partially lifted from this section of the Monongahela. We reached Harmon just as darkness fell. I found a small motel that accepted dogs and collapsed into bed, emotionally and physically exhausted. In the morning, I'd begin the work of fulfilling my promise to Elizabeth. The next day, I visited the local historical society. The elderly volunteer at the desk was initially skeptical when I asked about murders in the area from the 1800s, but her interest was piqued when I mentioned the names Elizabeth, Thomas, and Caldwell. "Oh my," she said, eyes widening. "You're talking about the Witch of Spruce Hollow. That's one of our most infamous local legends." She disappeared into a back room and returned with several folders. Elizabeth Blackwood was hanged in 1879 for supposedly murdering 3 children from Harmon. According to the legend, she practiced witchcraft deep in the forest and lured the children to their deaths. Her lover, Thomas Green, was never found. leading many to believe he was her accomplice who escaped justice. "That's not what happened," I said firmly, drawing a curious look from the woman. I hesitated, then decided on a partial truth. "I'm a historian researching 19th century miscarriages of justice. I found some documents that suggest Elizabeth was innocent, and Thomas was trying to prove it when he disappeared." I showed her the letter, but kept the locket and lock of hair hidden. She read it with increasing excitement. "This changes everything. The Caldwell she mentions must be Jeremiah Caldwell, who was the wealthiest man in the county at that time. His son, William, was known to be troubled, but I've never seen any suggestion he was involved in the children's deaths." "Is there any record of what happened to Thomas Green?" I asked. She shook her head. "None that I've found. He simply vanished. Most assumed he fled after Elizabeth's execution." Over the next 2 days, with the Historical Society's help, I dug deeper into the case. We found old newspaper accounts of the children's murders, records of Elizabeth's hasty trial, and mentions of Thomas Green's disappearance. We even located property records showing that the cabin in the clearing had indeed belonged to Elizabeth Blackwood. The most damning discovery came from the diary of Sheriff James Morris of Oakland, the very man Thomas had mentioned in his letter. An entry dated 3 days after Elizabeth's hanging read, "Green never arrived with his evidence. Caldwell's men intercepted him, I'm certain of it. Without proof, there was nothing I could do to stop the hanging. God forgive me for my inaction. The truth dies with Green, wherever they buried him." "We need to find where they buried Thomas," I told the Historical Society volunteer, whose name was Margaret. "He might have had evidence on his body that could clear Elizabeth's name." Margaret looked skeptical. "After 145 years, even if we could find his remains, what evidence could possibly survive?" I didn't have a good answer. I was following an impulse I didn't fully understand, driven by the memory of Elizabeth's pleading eyes and the promise I'd made. That night, in my motel room, I was awakened by a cold presence. Elizabeth stood at the foot of my bed, more solid than I'd seen her before. Rex whimpered but didn't bark, watching her with nervous eyes. She pointed at the locket on the bedside table, then made a gesture like opening a book. "The locket?" I asked, picking it up. "There's something else inside it?" I examined it more carefully in the dim light and noticed a slight gap in the metal rim. Using my thumbnail, I pried at it, and a small hidden compartment opened. Inside was a tiny folded paper, preserved all these years in its airtight space. I carefully unfolded it. It was a note in a child's handwriting. I saw Willie Caldwell do it. He made me promise not to tell, or he said he would hurt me too. But I can't keep silent anymore. He killed Jimmy and Sarah, and little Mary too. It was signed Emma Ross, age 10. The next morning, I showed the note to Margaret, who was ecstatic. Emma Ross was the daughter of the local school teacher. This is the evidence Thomas was bringing back, an eyewitness account from a child who survived. Over the next few days, we pieced together the full story. William Caldwell, son of the powerful Jeremiah Caldwell, had killed 3 children in a remote part of the forest. Emma Ross had witnessed it but was too frightened to speak up initially. When she finally told Thomas Green, he tried to bring her testimony to Sheriff Morris to clear Elizabeth's name. But Jeremiah Caldwell's men intercepted him, killed him, and destroyed the evidence, except for the note Thomas had hidden in the locket. With the Historical Society's help, we published the true story in the local newspaper and arranged for a memorial to be placed at the site of Elizabeth's cabin. The headline read, "Local Legend Reversed. The Witch of Spruce Hollow Innocent. Victim of 19th Century Cover-Up." On my last night in Harmon, before returning home, Elizabeth appeared to me one final time. She was smiling, her form glowing softly in the darkness of my motel room. The wound at her throat was gone, and she looked peaceful. She placed her hand over her heart, then extended it toward me, a gesture of profound gratitude. "You're welcome," I whispered. "Rest now, Elizabeth. Your name is cleared." She nodded, her form growing increasingly translucent. Just before she faded completely, I heard a whisper, clear as day. "Find him. Please." In the morning, I knew what I had to do. I extended my stay in Harmon and organized a search party to look for Thomas Green's remains. Using ground-penetrating radar and the help of local archaeologists, we searched the areas north of Elizabeth's cabin. After a week of searching, we found him, buried in a shallow grave about 2 miles from the cabin. With his remains was a pocket watch with his initials, confirming his identity. We arranged for Thomas to be properly buried next to the memorial for Elizabeth. The night after Thomas's reburial, I stood alone at the gravesite. The fog had returned, but it was different now. Natural, not the oppressive, supernatural mist I'd encountered before. In the gentle moonlight filtering through the trees, I saw 2 figures walking hand in hand toward the forest's edge. They turned back once, and I could see their faces clearly. Elizabeth and Thomas, together at last, finally at peace. They faded into the mist, and I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Rex pressed against my leg, no longer afraid, his tail wagging gently. "Come on, boy," I said, scratching his ears. "Let's go home." We never returned to that part of the Monongahela National Forest, but I think about Elizabeth and Thomas often. Sometimes when the fog rolls in at dusk, I imagine I see 2 figures walking hand in hand, finally free from the tragedy that bound them to that forest for over a century. And sometimes, I swear, I hear a woman's voice on the wind, no longer calling Thomas's name, but whispering, "Thank you." I've hiked many trails since then, but I always keep the tin box with me as a reminder that some journeys lead us to unexpected destinations, and some promises transcend time itself.